And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with a special edition of UFO News Network Sunday. Today we're going to pay tribute to Stanton Friedman, who died this past Monday night, unfortunately. And obviously a lot of folks have a lot to say about him. Let's bring on our co-host, my co-host today, Chant Hanna. And Chant, go ahead and let's get this rolling.
Thank you, Frank. We are profoundly saddened to report the loss of Stanton Friedman, who died May 13, 2019. Stanton's near omnipresent status, crafted over his nearly 60-year career at the helm of ufology, is unrivaled. His reputation has transcended that of many deeply involved in ufology. His image instantly recognizable in the thousands of pictures of him at various conferences all around the world. He was an indefatigable researcher who was always willing to discuss the topic of ufology. Thank you everyone for being on our show. With us in tribute to today regarding Stanton Friedman, we have quite a few guests, all very special guests who have come forward to speak on behalf of Stanton to give tribute to this great man. We wanted to start off with a wonderful quote from Shane Hurd, who is a field investigator with Phoenix MUFON. The quote I have from him is, "Stan meant so much to me, as I am sure he did with you as well. I appreciate his logic, communication, and kind-heartedness. I love his 4 points about debunkers. 1, don't bother me with the facts. My mind is made up. 2, what the public doesn't know, I won't tell them. 3, argue your position by proclamation. 4, if you can't attack the data, attack the person. It's easier." He was so powerful because of his simple, straightforward, and intelligent point. I will miss him immensely. We wanted to go ahead and move on forward to be able to bring on some wonderful guests we have, which is Stacey Wright, Assistant Director of Phoenix MUFON, Jim Mann, the Director of Phoenix MUFON. We also have Alejandro Rojas and his wonderful partner, Karen Brard. They run UFO Congress. They're here with us now. Hello, Stacey, Jim, Alejandro, and Karen. How are you all doing today?
Hello. We're good. Hi. Doing great.
We're so glad to have you all on with us today for this very special edition of our show today. We would like to actually start off with Jim. Jim, would you like to say a few words about Stanton, please?
Yeah, Stan Friedman is the reason that I began taking ufology seriously. Stan was, he was such an icon, and for me, he was a hero. And I mean that because he was a soldier. He knew he knew about as much as you can know about ufology. And I always was impressed at the way he would stick up for ufology. If you went face to face or toe to toe with Stan on any issue regarding ufology, boy, you better do your homework, right? Yeah, because he could put you under the table very quick. That man had a brilliant mind. And along with everything else, I always loved the fact that Stan would always say, don't be an apologist ufologist. Remember that?
Yep.
Don't apologize because you believe in UFOs. And that kind of stuck with me, along with all those other little things that Shane Hurd had mentioned. But I guess Stan was a hero. And that's what he'll always be in my mind.
Jim, Jim, really quick. He was a physicist by training, but he certainly didn't debate or argue like one.
Yeah, no, you're right. He Stan had his facts in order, and again, like I said, if you wanted to debate with Stan, and I'm not saying that everything Stan said was spot on, but Stan had a reason for believing what he believed. He had his facts straight. So again, if you were going to talk with Stan, and quite honestly, the first time I met Stan Friedman, first time Stacey and I met Stan Friedman, we took him out to dinner before our MUFON meeting. He was going to be our very first speaker, our very first public speaker at Phoenix MUFON back in 2007, October of 2007. And we took him out to dinner just before the meeting. And I can tell you, I have never sat at the table and spoke with such an intelligent man in my life. I think my jaw hit the table and it stayed there as he just talked about facts and figures and dates and people. He had it all. And I was just amazed. And so that just cemented my resolve to continue working within the MUFON organization and in ufology. He was just a great guy. And you couldn't help but be inspired. If you were a thinking person at all, you couldn't help but be inspired when you were talking and visiting with Stan. And on top of all of that, Stan had a heart of gold. He was a good guy. And I think that's what a lot of us who knew him personally are going to remember, how easy he was to talk with. And he was just a great guy. We were privileged to celebrate his 80th birthday. Was it which one was it? 75th birthday with him. And so he came to Phoenix MUFON and spoke for us. And he celebrated his birthday that day. And so that's what I remember Stan. Just a wonderful guy, and he's certainly going to be missed.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Stacey, I wanted to ask you, do you have any memories to share with us about Stan?
I have a lot of memories to share about Stan, and he truly was just a fine gentleman. Stan was always very reserved, very disciplined, thought about everything before he spoke the words out of his mouth, and he was just a gentleman to everyone. He was so nice, and he reserved his sense of humor for just when he got to know someone, pretty well. But yeah, he was just a great guy. I mean, my kids both met him. He stayed at my house twice. And I remember Stan was just absolutely enthralled by a set of salt and pepper shakers that I have, that you push the button on top and it grinds it for you, and it comes out the bottom and it's all lit up with a light. And I remember him sitting there at my table staring at that, trying to figure out how to work it. And I didn't say a word. And he just finally pushed the button on top, and it came out, and he looked at me just like Mr. Spock, and he says, "Fascinating."
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that wonderful story. Alejandro, you're here with us today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
It's wonderful to have you on our show. We wanted to know if you had any words to share with us about Stanton.
Yeah, I mean, listening to everybody, one thing that really stands out, I think we took Stanton kind of for granted a bit, because he had so many wonderful qualities. His integrity was so high. He was a wonderful, articulate, intelligent, compelling speaker. He was fun to listen to. And on top of all of that, he never said no to doing a talk. He was at so many different conferences. When you talk to, and I'm sure you'll hear this because we've been hearing this a lot, he was my first speaker at my event. He was my first podcast interview, because he would say yes to everyone. He didn't care, if you've never done a podcast before. He was going to come on and talk to anybody about this field and share some of the best information out there. So right off the bat, we all had this partner and this mentor. And, with him gone, and you sit back and you think about the field and other people, and we all aspire to be like Stan, but nobody's like Stan. He just set a very high bar, and he was a treasure. I think it would be a treasure for any field, and for ufology, we were just so lucky to have him.
Thank you, Alejandro. Karen, you're with us today. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great, and I also remember Stanton fondly. I saw him at a lot of different conferences, and he always would give me a hug and a kiss on the cheek, and he always seemed so comfortable wherever he was. I never saw him ruffled or, in a bad mood. He just always, so nice and seemed to be happy wherever he was. But one thing I just learned recently was kind of a trend with him, that he was a first for so many people. He was a first for Phoenix MUFON. He was Alejandro's first podcast and lecture, and I just realized that he was my first UFO lecture that I'd ever heard.
Really?
In 1993, he was at San Diego State University, and I don't know how I came upon it, But I got in my car and I went down there and I heard a UFO lecture for the first time ever, and it was Stanton. So,
That's
yeah, he's
incredible.
been a big part of everyone's life,
Yes.
and I'm going to miss him.
Hey, Karen,
Here.
really quick question for you. I never had the opportunity to see him speak live. How did I'm going to guess I know the answer already, but how did he go over? How did the crowd react to him?
Oh, everybody was just enthralled because, I mean, back then, I mean, if somebody, a UFO seeker was going to come, you know, the people that were going to go were the diehard people that were really interested in it. And we hung on to every word, and he always, infused humor in his talks. He was a very charming man. But yeah, he was great. Everybody loved him. And he was surrounded by everybody at the end of his talk. Everybody wanted to ask more questions.
One thing I noticed is, like everybody has been saying, he was so accessible. He never acted like he was above anybody else or too elitist. He didn't act like he was an intellectual elitist. What he did was, if anybody, even if they had the tiniest little talk show to the biggest, he would make himself available. Also, it didn't matter if you were the average Joe on the street, so to speak, or a high-profile person. He would make time to talk to you. He wasn't the one to schmooze with only the star-studded crowd. He liked to speak to everybody. And so we just really appreciate your having shared all of your wonderful stories today. And by the way, we also wanted to mention where you're at, which is where I wanted to go with Saucer Man today, my camera guy. And that is, it's a UFO convention, McMinnville, Oregon. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I believe there's many people who spoke, which is among the guests were Peter Davenport, who emceed the event, Bob Lazar, and Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, and who else was there?
James Clarkson was speaking. I know there are some investigators local who looked into Trent. And, of course, I'm not sure if you mentioned, I think you did, Commander David Fravor. So that was unique. So we have, Bob Lazar. He's spoken for the UFO Congress before. He said that was going to be his last. But Jeremy was able to get him out here, Corbell, who's friends with him. And here he said this is going to be his last. So we'll see if it's actually his last. And then David Fravor said this would be his first and only event. Luckily, they taped them, and they'll be out soon. And people are really going to want these because I'd love to hear from everybody else. But I think that they shared a lot of exclusive information we've never heard anywhere else. And it was incredible. I love their talks.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
And it's a really fun place here. I mean, McMinnville really knows how to put on the fun. The whole town was involved, and they had this great parade. It only rained just a little bit, but we all had a really good time. And David Paulides was also here and put on an excellent talk. So I think everyone enjoyed every lecture that was here, and there was just lots of fun and the whole air of festivity here with this McMinnville UFO Fest. It's been great.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for letting us know a little bit about that wonderful convention. I hope you all have safe travels back home, and thank you for having taken the discretionary time to speak with us today. We really appreciate you for that.
Well, thank you, Chant.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chant.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Always a pleasure. I would like to go ahead and read a quote, by the way, from the wonderful Race Hobbs, who is a dear person. And I personally feel like he is a role model in the realm of ufology. He's done a lot. He's accomplished a lot. He knows just about everybody in this field. He said, Stanton T. Friedman, to me, is and always will be the father of ufology. I always respected him for his tireless efforts in archival research, his willingness to share and work together, and most importantly, his professional representation of this subject. My favorite quote by Stan, and he gave so many, do your research by investigation, not proclamation. When I asked him in his last interview on camera with me what advice he had for the next generation of UFO researchers, that's exactly what he said. He was a brave and gentle man. Race Hobbs, President, Head of Programming at KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. Frank, did you get a chance? Go ahead.
We've compiled quite a few quotes from in tribute to Mr. Friedman, and we've got this one from Denise Marcel, granddaughter of Jesse Marcel Sr. The Marcel family's hearts and prayers go out to Stanton Friedman and his family. He was one of a kind and will be truly missed. When I think of the Roswell incident, the first names that come to mind is Stanton Friedman. I don't think he knew at the time when he first interviewed my grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Jesse Marcel Sr. in 1979, our lives would be forever entwined. I think at one time or another in our lives, we all wondered, did I make a difference? With Stanton, we know the answer to this question. The impact he had on the UFO community was unparalleled. The Marcel family will always be indebted to him for his hard work and dedication for exposing what really happened in Roswell. Stanton Friedman will be greatly missed by the Marcel family and the millions of UFO enthusiasts around the world. And Chant, you want to take the next quote?
Yes, and I also wanted to remind you to please call Michael Hall, because I know he's over there at McMinnville, Oregon UFO convention, and I know he wants to talk to us.
Okay.
And it would really be wonderful to be able to have an opportunity to speak with him.
But he's got to be on Skype, so.
Yes, okay, understood. So let me go ahead and move on to the next quote. It'll just take me a moment. All right, just 1 second. Sorry about the wait here. Okay, I have in memory of Stanton Friedman, and it'll just take a second. It's coming up. It's Lynn Buchanan. The first time I met Stanton was when he came to visit me in Alamogordo, New Mexico, after which he and I drove to Aztec, New Mexico, where we were to speak at a UFO conference. On the way there and back, we had the chance to get to know each other as regular humans. It was 2 to 5 hour trips of personal time that almost nobody ever got with Stanton. As it turns out, he was very human, very personable, and we became friends. I will miss him. Lynn Buchanan, Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army, retired, remote viewer, trainer in the U.S. Army, remote viewing unit from 84 to 92, author of The Seventh Sense.
And we've got this from Kathleen Marden, who co-wrote a book about the Hill case with Stanton, obviously worked very close with him. As I reflect upon Stanton's life in the 14 years that we worked together on archival research and writing, I think that we accomplished a great deal. He thought so too. Stanton and I began with Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, and discovered that we worked together harmoniously. So we researched and wrote 2 additional books, Science Was Wrong and Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers. In addition to being business associates, we became close friends. He was the gentleman who accompanied me to speaking engagements, the trustworthy person who shared a vendor table with me, the person who would give me an honest opinion, the brilliant intellect who was always meticulous in his work, the defender of the truth, and a shining example of a decent human being. He was kind, generous, and loved by many. He had an amazing sense of humor that brought uproarious laughter to our work. We were looking forward to another visit in July. And that's Kathleen Marden.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, great. I actually have Dr. Kitai here. Let me go ahead and bring hers up. Just take a second. Dr. Kitai, the passing of Stanton Friedman, ufology icon, nuclear physicist, and grandfather to many, is a great loss for the field. Know firsthand how difficult it must have been for him to transition from his respected scientific career to the controversial UFO topic. I am personally grateful for his stellar contribution, kindness, and heart-to-heart discussions we had throughout the past 20 years. Stan will be missed, but his memory and his work will definitely live on. Dr. Lynn Kitai, internationally acclaimed physician, health educator, and is known for her work on Phoenix Lights Network website, Phoenix Lights book, award-winning Phoenix Lights documentary, the Phoenix Lights UFO and Crop Circle graphic novel, activities, and coloring book.
And we have this from Paula Harris, the photojournalist and investigative reporter. The great Stanton Friedman led the way for credibility in the field on serious UFO research. He was respected worldwide for his work and led the way for all of us. He is a legend and his legacy immeasurable.
Okay, thank you very much. Just 1 second. I have one from Tom Conwell that I'm going to read. I am so happy I had the opportunity to meet Stan. He was very smart, yet he made you feel important. This life without him will never be the same. Tom Conwell, ufologist and forensic pattern researcher.
And we have this from Luis Elizondo from the To the Stars Academy and the upcoming TV show unidentified, also ran ATIP in the Pentagon. Although I never had the privilege of meeting Mr. Friedman personally, he was a pioneer and a proponent of science and the truth. His pursuit of this during a time of stigma and obfuscation is a testament to his character. History will remember him kindly as a friend of humanity and maybe even more. Unfortunately, people like him and Mozart never realized their contributions during their lifetimes.
Thank you, Frank. I have one last one here from Paul Dean. Stan will remain influential for years to come. To me, it's his earlier work which was most influential, and he could hold an audience, which is no mean feat. Paul Dean, researcher and historian.
And I've got one last one here from Isaac Coy, a researcher and archivist over in England. Stanton Friedman has been an iconic figure in UFO research for decades, particularly in relationship to MJ-12, UFO crashes, and other highly controversial areas. He also helped highlight to other researchers scientific and statistical work done in relation to UFOs, which even today too few researchers have looked into, particularly Project Blue Book's Special Report number 14. He also had a great sense of humor, again, something that is all too rare within ufology. I will miss him. So, one last one from Alex Sakaris, who is the host of the Skeptico podcast. One thing I remember and appreciated about Stan was his willingness to answer tough questions and follow the data. So there we go. Chant, great job on accumulating all those quotes in memoriam to Stanton Friedman.
Thank you very much for having read all that. I wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to share everybody's tribute to Stanton, and just wanted to let you know that Jan Harzan would like us to go ahead and give him a call in a few minutes, but you can call him now. Let me go ahead and share that with you. But yes, we do have quite a few wonderful people who are going to be on our show today. Okay. And one of them is going to be Jan Harzan. Then we will also have Dean Alioto, the director, coming on soon.
Okay.
Okay. And we also have Stephen Bassett, who's going to be joining us later. One thing I wanted to mention about Steve Bassett is he is one of two people who are lobbying Washington. The other is Chase Kloetzke, and she's going to be on with us as well. And she needs you to go ahead and bring her onto the show as well.
Okay, hang on a sec.
But yes, so we have a large panel of guests. Everybody wants to have the opportunity to pay tribute to Stan. And one thing I noticed about Stanton Friedman is he always had stories to share with people. And he didn't try and act like he was a scientist,
Hello, Jan.
Yes.
Jan,
hi.
How are you? Yeah, Jan.
Okay.
Yeah, come on in, and Jan, and if you would, just a few words about Stanton Friedman.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. You know, the word that epitomizes Stanton, in my opinion, is true gentleman. I mean, Stan was the ultimate gentleman in the whole UFO field. Even his detractors had great respect for him and always talked positively about him. They may not have agreed with him, but they talked very positively about him and his manners. So I would say we all need to kind of learn from Stanton and how he conducted himself as a ufologist. And obviously we have a huge debt of gratitude for him for having been one of the first people out there talking about this subject back when it wasn't cool to do so. Stan has been a 50-year member of MUFON. He's spoken at 24 of our 49 symposiums. He's written 207 columns in the MUFON Journal, which has been published for the last 50 years straight. It's almost a third of everything, and he's just contributed so much. We just owe a huge debt of gratitude to him and everything he's accomplished.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for those words, Jan. I wanted to ask you, did you have a lot of contact with Stanton throughout the years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I spoke to Stanton several times during the years. He spoke at 24 symposiums. So, and I've been helping with symposiums since 2001, which was really the first time I met Stanton. And had an opportunity to introduce him. We're going to be doing a tribute to Stanton at this symposium on Saturday night. I've got his nephew coming in who did a movie on Stanton called Flying Saucers Are Real, or Chasing Flying Saucers, the Stanton Stanton Friedman story. And it should be a real great time for everybody to come out and to celebrate him. So if anyone has an interest in being there, you don't necessarily need to buy a ticket for that because it'll be Saturday night around 9 p.m. But I'd invite everybody in the public who has an interest, who'd like to celebrate his life, to come down and join us.
That's Paul Kimball, isn't it there, Jan?
Yes, it is. It's Paul Kimball. You're right. You are correct. Lives up in Canada, and I think he might have been the guy who actually broke the story on this, because when I spoke to Stan's wife the day this happened, she was asking that people not contact the family and give them their time to be alone. So
Sure.
they hadn't put anything up publicly. I think it came out, I would imagine it came out through Paul. I could be mistaken on that, but it was total shock to everybody to hear that he had passed. But, Stan was one of those guys. He just kind of energizer bunny. He just went and went and went. I mean, kept recharging his batteries and going some more. So God bless him for doing that.
And Paul, he's done some fine work in the field too. He's made a couple of documentaries. He made the documentary Stanton Friedman is Real. And he also made a documentary, Top 10 UFO Cases, which did feature Stan. And that's a real fine documentary. Oh, they both are, but the second one is a real fine documentary that covers some very interesting cases. So that's worth a look.
Yeah, we may show a second feature, although I think I'd like to give people a chance to maybe come up and have an open mic and just share their Stanton stories, because I'm sure there's lots of them out there. And, of course, there isn't a UFO conference you can't go to where Stan's not sitting at his table selling books, and his partner, Kathleen Marden, the two of them were like inseparable and published some fine publications. So, just a true human being, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for Stan. And, I wouldn't say we were close, because Stan was always a very quiet guy, but we spoke often, and he was always, if he said he was going to do something, he did it. And my understanding is, even though he wasn't feeling up to par, he felt he had a commitment to the Ohio conference that he went to, and it was actually returning from that conference when he passed away. So that's just who he is. I mean, if he said he's going to do something, he did it. His word was his honor. And I think the other thing too is, even though he disagreed with people on certain things, it could be disagreeable. He didn't do it in a mean or vicious way. He actually gave his facts and let them speak their piece. And that's actually in the movie that you'll see, which you can get online too. It's Chasing Flying Saucers, the Stanton Friedman story. And I had an opportunity to watch it this past week. It's really a great film that Paul put together.
Thank you very much, Jan. And also, would you mind please repeating a little bit more about the MUFON symposium you'll be having, or letting everybody know about that, so that we can go ahead and direct our listeners? Okay.
Yeah, it's our 50th anniversary. We're celebrating it here in Irvine, California, at the Hotel Irvine, just off the 405 freeway at MacArthur, actually at Jamboree. It's actually where Stanton spoke in 2001 when the movie was done by Paul Kimball. So it's interesting. I watched the footage, and it was a drawback to almost 20 years ago when he was out here speaking at that first symposium here in Orange County. So invite everyone to join. You can go to MUFONsymposium.com and get all the facts. We've got some great speakers. Paul Hynek, son of J. Allen Hynek, will be there. Probably the close associate with Stan, I'm sure, through the years. And we'll just have a whole lot of good people. I've got A.J. Brard coming up from Brazil. We've got Klaus Svan from the AFU out of Sweden who will be speaking. We've just got a lot of great speakers. Jim Penniston, one of the few men that I know of who's ever touched a UFO, will be talking. So it's just going to be a great time for people to come out, learn, even if you just come out and network, because you don't have to buy a ticket to come to the symposium. You can come hang out in the vendor area. We've got movies going. We've got hopefully an art show that'll be happening, still being put together. But all these things you can do without spending a dime. But if you want to see speakers and things like that, we have either 1, 2, or 3 day tickets for you. So do what fits your pocketbook, but definitely come out and celebrate Stan's life. That'll be Saturday night, 9 p.m. at the Hotel Irvine.
Wonderful, Jan. Thank you so much for your time today. You've been very generous with it, and we appreciate you very much also.
Okay. Well, God bless you guys for honoring Stan. I know he's watching down and smiling right now, so thank you.
God bless you also. Thank you. And we have the wonderful
Bye.
Chase Kloetzke we would like to bring onto the show. I really don't think she needs an introduction. Everybody knows Chase. Chase, are you here with us?
Hi, Chant.
Okay.
Can you
Hi. How are you? Yes, we can hear you. Absolutely. How are you doing today?
Oh, very well. Thank you so much for having me on to say a few words about Stan.
We're thrilled to have you on. I would also like, if you don't mind, just for you to share a little bit about yourself to our new listeners, new to who you are. But however, everybody does know who Chase is. She's a wonderful person. I personally feel she's a role model in ufology. Could you please share a little bit about yourself?
Aw, thanks, Chant. You know, I'm very fond of you and Frank as well. I love your show. I'm a huge
Thank
fan.
you.
Everyone knows that as well. But yeah, I'm an investigator. I'm an explorer, and just out here, boots on the ground. I'm a forensic specialist, and I think that's what separates my work from most is right now. Just focus on evidence, a million accounts. Now we need investigators to actually go out and dig up that evidence and admissibility and to meet that burden of proof and scientific scrutiny. And that can only be done with thorough and professional investigations.
Okay, thank you very much for having shared that with us. Chase, I wanted to ask you, have you had any personal interaction with Stanton?
Lots of it. And unfortunately, the last time I was with Stan, we were speaking on a cruise together, and we were in Mexico, and it was a great time. It was an amazing time. And one of Stan's favorite things about me working with him had nothing to do with me. It was because my husband, who is a nuclear submarine commander, would sit and talk to him about nukes and, some things that he's could talk about and he just would be in heaven talking with people about, his nuclear background. And he would light up like a Christmas tree. And I always call that guy time, when the guys are all, just with their wine and, a cigar, and they're just, deep in conversation. It's really wonderful to see that. And another one I know he loved that, he loved to talk to is Race Hobbs. Racy is kind of the guy that, Stanton was drawn to and just really lit up. And you could tell how much he enjoyed the conversation. So I've seen that quite a bit. But, I've had my own interactions with Stanton. And, when I think about today's ufology and I get very reminiscent on the guys like Stanton. That was, he was iconic and the absolute symbolism of professionalism. Proper debate without the hate and the shade and, all the things that have infiltrated into our field of ufology. And we have to look at those that came before us. One thing I remember, it's easy to look at Stanton and realize his work is epic, but most of it was done when the computer wasn't even here yet. These guys dug through files. They spent weeks trying to find a piece of paper. And I think we have to remember that they were doing it before it was cool. And I just love that. And that was always the creds I would give him. And, it was always a joy to be with him. He was a very calming presence in especially Congress, which everyone knows is my favorite conference. And, so we get out there and, Congress is rocking and rolling and, there's all this activity and everybody's upbeat and it's positive and, but there's a lot of energy. And here's Stan, usually back there with Kathleen, partnered, spending all day and never complaining. Not one time did he leave early. I miss him already. He was huge, and I hate that we're losing some of our greats. Jim Mars was another blow. That was a godsmack, and now Stanton. So, I think when we see people that we still have, like Linda Moulton Howe, and many, many others, we need to show them a lot more appreciation and just really maybe a little extra hug or a little more support. But thank you guys so much for letting me speak. I just remember a really gentle man who was so smart, never gave up, just was cool without being flamboyant. He was awesome.
Thank you, Chase, for those incredible words about Stanton. And we also appreciate your having taken the time to spend some time with us today to pay tribute to this great man.
Thank you. It was so my honor. And for you and Frank, anything. I love you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot,
love
Chase.
You too. Thank you, Chase.
Bye.
Today, I wanted to let everybody know we have a very special person on. His name is Michael W. Hall. He's known as the paranormal lawyer. Michael, how are you? Okay,
Michael?
we might be having a few audio issues regarding Michael, but we'll go ahead and move on to another person I know that we would love to talk to about Stanton, and that is Rich Hoffman. Rich, are you with us today?
Sure am.
Okay, Rich, I just wanted to share with our listeners that you're on the board of the Scientific Coalition of Ufology, and can you share a little bit about yourself with our listeners?
Yeah, I sure can. And let me correct you. We're no longer the Scientific Coalition for Ufology. We're the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You've rebranded already, Rich.
I'm sorry?
You've rebranded already.
We sure did. Didn't take long, did it? That's going back to, I knew Stanton back in the early 70s. I remember going to hear a presentation, I guess, where they were going to talk about the Larry Coyne case, and Jenny Zeidman was going to be presenting. And I met Stanton at that time. And we had a meal together, and we were, shooting the breeze. He's one of those guys where it was he was extremely funny. He could hit you with pretty much any kind of logic, and you'd be like, wow, where did he pull that? But I mean, his uncanny ability to remember details and to investigate UFOs to the nth degree with that level of granularity was absolutely, for me, the most impressive thing about Stan. He just had an impeccable gift for doing his research and his homework very well, and then being able to, recall that with an amazing level of detail. There's a lot of us that lose those details as we age, and here he is. He knows all the details and can remember them quite well. So, what a great loss. I think back to my history, going back to, in the Dayton, Ohio area, and just Project Blue Book, and knowing, like Hynek and Stringfield. I got to meet a lot of occasions because he lived just in Cincinnati and I lived in Dayton. These were and I met Kehoe, and these are the kind of people that, you think about when you think about the earlier parts of UFO history. And I'm sitting here, been going through a lot of books and remembering Stanton's work. He's done a great job of detailing this. And then his amazing ability to be able to confront any debunker on any level was always another incredible thing. I mean, he didn't mince words. He would be able to debate the best of them, and you certainly couldn't argue with him. Just an amazing guy that we will definitely miss. I was curious that he said in his last presentation that he was actually getting ready to write another book. And I'd hope that somebody would be able to know a little bit about that and could somehow let us know where he was going to go with that, and maybe do something to take his works and his information to help make that a reality. But he's going to be missed by me, and I know a lot of others. And thank you for allowing me to share this and distribute.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe Steve Bassett is on with us now. Steve, are you there?
I certainly am.
Yeah, Steve, tell us a little bit about your experiences with the great Stanton Friedman.
Experiences with I was a colleague I didn't really get to know Stan personally, but certainly I encountered him many, many times. And I was aware of his importance and saw many of his lectures. I have a couple of Stanton stories, but one in particular is interesting. In 2007, rather, it was the 60th anniversary of Roswell. I was speaking at the Roswell Festival, and so was Stan. And he got there a little bit late. Nobody noticed that. But then, a little later in the conference, the word had sort of gotten around that Stan, who, as you know, spoke a lot, went to a lot of conferences, traveled a lot, and he lived up, I think, in Halifax. So it traveling out of there down to the U.S. was not easy. So he was on his way to the Pearson International Airport to fly to Roswell, and he was tired, and he fell asleep at the wheel. And he was on the highway, and apparently he was very lucky, but the car just slowly, how should I say, slid to the right and then down an embankment and flipped over and came to a screeching halt on its top. And Stanton got out of the car, just moderately injured, maybe injured, a little soreness maybe, but nothing serious. Got a ride up to the airport and flew to Roswell and gave his presentation. And I thought that was cool. We could have lost him in 2007 easily. When you fall asleep at the car on the highway,
Sure.
Your situation is not good. Your odds are not good. But he was lucky, and so we got him for another 12 years. But I remember that very well. And another story, way back in 1997, this is the 50th anniversary of Roswell. I was new in the field. I'd only been in it now for about a year and 3 months or so forth. Not well known, but I'd done a couple of Coast to Coast with Art Bell. And I went to Roswell. I was working with Bob Dean. We had a petition, a Roswell petition back then, and we're trying to get signatures to have the government reveal the files on Roswell, which would have, if they really dumped the files out, would have ended the truth embargo. And they had gathered a lot already. We took a bunch of the petitions to the 1997 festival. God, we knew there was going to be 20, 30, 40,000 people there. So it would have been ideal. So we were giving out the petitions, and we had a table. But in the hotel, I walked by the restaurant around breakfast time, and there was Stanton Friedman. I never met him, sitting in a booth across from Jesse Marcel Jr. And I don't think I'd met Jesse Marcel either. But I figured, this is a good opportunity. So I walked on in, and I introduced myself, and I sat down. I'm sitting next to Jesse across from Stan. And I started to explain this petition. And back then, Stan was pretty conservative. He's generally a conservative person to begin with. He wasn't keen on the idea of the government, quote, just telling the public about the ET presence. He felt that there was a lot of national security stuff there and secrecy that would undoubtedly be jeopardized. So he was certainly wanted to pursue the truth on it. But as far as the government coming forward and saying, okay, guess what, ETs are here, he wasn't really down for that. And the funny thing is that Jesse Marcel, in the middle of this discussion with Stan, and I didn't press him on it, I assure you, Jesse Marcel, without saying a word, just reaches over, slides one of the petitions in front of himself, and signs it. What's interesting also is that years later, in the last years of Stan's life, he was in fact coming around on the disclosure issue. He was making clear statements that it was time for the government to inform the people of the truth of this ET presence, not necessarily dump every secret out on the White House lawn. But he was, I think, down for disclosure. And the saddest thing for me regarding Stan is because he wasn't cheated in life. He lived to be 84. He had He had marriages, he had children. Obviously, he had passion, and he worked up to the last day of his life. But he did not live to see disclosure, like a number of colleagues didn't make it. The truth embargo is now going into roughly its 72nd year. They've managed to stretch it out. And so the truth embargo has outlived really many of the giants of the field. And that always pains me when that happens.
Thank you, Steve, for having shared that, all of those wonderful stories about the great Stanton Friedman. And I wanted to let everybody know that Steve is head of the Paradigm Research Group. And Steve, can you please share with folks a little bit about what you do? I wanted to let everybody know that you lobby for us on behalf of the UFO community in Washington. Is that correct?
I have done that. I am a registered lobbyist. I registered in '96, first person to ever do that. And many years later, just recently, the second person registered as a lobbyist on this issue, and that is Chase Kloetzke. So we're the only two registered lobbyists. Why there aren't more, I cannot imagine. But I guess it may be because the pay is so terrible, meaning it's zero. And it's very difficult people to listen to you. But that is only a small portion of what I do. I am an activist, and I use all modalities, particularly the media. I've lobbied the media extensively. I've also given more interviews on the subject than anybody, living or dead, way above 1,000, probably 1,200, 1,300 interviews. Of course, this is a result of internet radio. If it wasn't for internet radio, I could never have hit a number like that, I assure you. But everybody has as you probably know, everybody has an internet radio show now. In fact,
oh yeah, there's a lot of them out there,
right? So, and so educating the public. And I've done a number of initiatives, such as the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure, the X Conference, and so forth. So my job has always been the political engagement of the issue to bring about formal disclosure, formal confirmation by government, by the heads of state. Some people think that's unnecessary. I disagree. Without that formal acknowledgement, there is a whole list of things that isn't going to happen regarding this issue. Not the least of which is not going to be taught in the universities and colleges, which it still isn't, not at all, with only the tiniest of exceptions. The research money is not going to be available. Corporations are not going to get involved, and contactees are still going to be considered not believable by most people. In other words, it's just basically a giant lie, and a giant lie of this magnitude invariably does not bear well. The outcomes are not good. So that's what I do. And in order to do this, I draw upon the work of researchers. I'm not a researcher. You're not going to see me out in the Tules looking for burn marks on the ground and getting bit by lots of mosquitoes. That's not what I do. I leave that to others. And so the work of Stan Friedman, of course, was, like many, very important to being able to do what I do. And what's really probably the important thing about Stan, his major contribution, and there were several. Stan was one of three scientists, fully mainstream scientists, that operated during the early years, the early decades of this issue. There were three, the three that I consider the most important. Alan Hynek, who was born in 1910. James McDonald, the atmospheric scientist, was born in 1920. And then Stanton Friedman, who obviously was a nuclear physicist, born in 1934. And in that period, from 1947 to 1968, the truth embargo that the government was putting enormous effort in to manage and create was still in its early days. The lid wasn't completely on the pot. And obviously, Hynek was having significant impact because he had been an astronomy professor. He had been part of the Smithsonian. He had top credentials. He was brought into Blue Book. And then he changes his mind. Around 1967, he begins to realize that there's a skunk in the woodpile on this. And that was a blow to the truth embargo. James McDonald was a real problem for them because McDonald, very early on, before the truth embargo was well formed, became quite convinced there was a true phenomena, and he was going to prove it through very hard science. He devoted huge amounts of his time to it. And most particularly, McDonald was going around the country speaking to engineering and science groups and telling them, here's what's going on, and telling them in high scientific terms. And that was a major problem for the truth embargo. Stanton turns up later, and they all come together at a very interesting time. They come together, the three of them, in 1968 at the hearings in front of the House Aeronautics and Technology Committee. This is the last hearings on the UFO subject in the United States Congress, the real subject, not just looking for ETs in space. And all three were involved in that hearing. McDonald and Hynek actually testified in front of the committee. Stan Friedman submitted a paper. And these hearings this was a significant symposium, but it wasn't intended to end the truth embargo. It was intended as part of a wrap up to ending the government engagement of the issue. It was sort of a show put on by the Congress and by the DOD. That story hasn't been properly told, but it was this moment when these three key scientists came together, and these kinds of scientists were providing a gravitas that kept this issue going forward, because the nature of the truth embargo was that a lot of people would get involved, and some of them would have a lot of wild stuff, and there was a lot of hoaxes and frauds and so forth and disinformation designed to certainly keep the issue under control. But these three scientists would not allow that to completely take hold. They kept providing that gravitas. And then things changed. What happened was that 2 years later, there was another hearing on the supersonic transport, and McDonald mistakenly agreed to participate. He was an atmospheric scientist. And he goes in front of the committee, and one of the congressmen did not, McDonald opposed the SST. One of the congressmen who would have had a lot of jobs created because of that program it decided to undermine McDonald by ridiculing him literally in front of the committee and the audience by talking about his UFO stuff and little green men. This was a huge embarrassment for McDonald. He returned home. He had some other problems, and just a year later, after that hearing in 70, he committed suicide. So he was gone. That left just Stanton and Alan Hynek. Alan Hynek continued to the very end to pursue this issue, and he died in 86. And then that left just Stanton. So I always viewed Stan as the rock. He was the rock at the center of the extraterrestrial phenomena citizen science movement. He was conservative, consistent, solid. Debunkers and skeptics could not penetrate him. He was not movable in that regard, and because of that, because of his gravitas and his career, he had the ability to do things many of the regular researchers could not do. For instance, he could get on programs back in those days that others could not get on, because he was obviously a solid person, a solid scientist, no problem, bring Stan on. But he did something else. And he told me about this once, what he went through to get his college lectures. For year after year after year, for many, many years, Stan would send out 2 letters a year to a long list of colleges that he had I guess you could say, the right contact, the right door. And he would ask about being able to lecture. And he had to send out a lot of letters to get just a couple of lectures. but eventually Stan did over 600 lectures on campus on this subject. Nobody even remotely comes close to this. And so in that sense, he's bringing it into the academic community year after year after year. Huge contribution. And then, of course, the huge contribution that he made, because he was one of the first, if not the first, individuals to hear Jesse Marcel Sr.'s story, 1978, and 78, yes, 1978, 10 years after that hearing in Congress, in which Jesse Marcel, in poor health, he died 8 years later, reveals what he knew about Roswell. And the Roswell story completely comes back into play and becomes probably the major, most well-known, significant case in history. And of course, and became, and it always was, the Achilles heel of the U.S. government cover-up, truth embargo on this. They always knew that Roswell could be a massive problem for them if it ever got going. And if maybe if Stan had not gotten to him when he did, given his health, it's possible that others might not have, and the story might have died with Jesse Marcel Sr. in 1986, which, by the way, is the same year that James McDonnell died. So, not James McDonnell, Jesse Marcel Sr. So let me give you a little history here and how Stan played into it. So that was a significant contribution. And then as the years go by, he started to change his views on disclosure. In the last years of his life, I think he was in favor of it. In the early years, way back 20, 25 years ago, he wasn't. Toward the end, I think he felt it was time for the government to tell the truth. And he talked about that. And then, and I was so pleased about this, showing that Stanton's mind was while firm, not without some flexibility, not without some openness. He got involved in the contact field. He actually engaged in the issue of extraterrestrial contact and abduction, working with Kathleen Martin. They wrote a book, and so he was talking about that. It was like a second career in a way for him. And that's just a sense of his historical importance. I gave one of the relatively first groups, my group, Paradigm Research Group, gave him a Hall of Fame award at the first X conference in 2004, now almost 15 years ago. And that's up on my website. Of course, he's gotten other awards since. And after disclosure, Stan will be one of the people of this field that will get many, many accolades from around the world. His family will undoubtedly receive those on his behalf. Hynek as well, McDonnell too, but certainly Stan Friedman. So his legacy is assured because disclosure, Chant, is inevitable.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much. And I think Rich Hoffman would like to add Jacques Fabrice Vallée to that list of legendary folks you just talked about. And Jacques Vallée, who is a computer scientist, venture capitalist, author, ufologist, and astronomer, currently residing in San Francisco, California, definitely would add to that list of iconic people in ufology. Thank you very much, Steve, for your time today. We greatly appreciate it. Also wanted to share with folks regarding what Steve said about the 600 lectures that, or the lectures that Stan gave at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in 50 United States, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and appeared on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including on Larry King in 2007 and twice in 2008, and many documentaries. Wanted to see if our wonderful guest, Michael W. Hall, the paranormal lawyer and head of the UFOI team, is on with us. Michael, are you here with us? Okay, we might have a few audio issues going on with Michael. I know he can hear us, but for some reason we cannot hear him. I would like to ask the wonderful Earl Gray, who is the chief investigator of the Southern California chapter of California MUFON. Earl, how are you doing today?
Hey there, Chant. I'm doing really well.
Thank
How are
you
you
very
doing,
much for
Hey,
coming
Earl.
on the show. We're so glad to have
Hey,
you.
Frank.
Thank you.
Thank
Wanted
you.
to know if you could actually, sorry about the sound lag there, it's my fault. I wanted to know if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about Stanton Friedman from your perspective.
I would be honored to. Stanton Friedman was one of the very first ufologists that I ever met. For many years, I was kind of, the couch investigator. I read a lot. I read a lot of books about ufology, but I wasn't really, I wasn't in the field. I was just kind of studying for my own personal edification. So when it was about, it's going on 5 years now, when I decided to become a MUFON field investigator. And so it was, I believe it was a 2014 symposium out in Irvine. And I had just become a field investigator. I'd started investigating a couple of cases for the first time. And so it was like, well, hey, the symposium's literally in my backyard here. I got to go, And so I got to the Irvine Hotel, now out in the city of Irvine in Southern California. And I opened the door, walked in, and the first person I saw was Jan Harzan standing there. Yeah. And, I have to say, I was a little starstruck at that time because I had been reading about all these guys. I'd been seeing people on television shows and et cetera, but I didn't really know how approachable and how open and kind a lot of these people were. And Jan, of course, falls into that category. But Stanton Friedman was there at the symposium as well. And, he had kind of a large group around him. It was after he had spoken, he had given his lecture. And I kind of timidly went up to Stanton with, I had a first edition copy of his top secret magic book. And it was the one that, it was the first edition, so it didn't include his, he sort of did a redo on that book and added to it. And he knew that it was kind of a controversial book as well, when it came out. There were some questions about the documents and all that. So, but anyway, I waited till the crowd kind of thinned out, and I approached Stanton, and he was just the sweetest, kindest guy. Myself, at the time, being a new UFO investigator, I was a little daunted, coming up to this guy because he was sort of like the grand master of ufology. I think that we all kind of saw Stanton as sort of a living legend. He was one of those guys like Stringfield, all the guys that Rich Hoffman was just mentioning earlier, Stringfield and Hynek and he was of that caliber, and he kind of took the subject of UFOs and he made it so it was acceptable to talk about this on in every forum, really. So anyhow, I brought this book to Stanton and I introduced myself, and he was just very approachable and kind, and he noticed it was a first edition. He said, well, this doesn't have the added material that I added to the book. He said, but what I could do is I could always write it in the margins for you and update the book. Which, he was, and he had that little twinkle in his eye, and we were both laughing at it. And I almost took him up on it. It's like, sure, go ahead, Stanton. I would be very honored. But I'm looking at the book right now as I'm talking with you guys, and I'll never forget, just how kind, approachable, and dear he was. And he just wrote very simply, best wishes to you, Earl, and Stanton Friedman. But how much that means to me, how much that book means to me. And that I got to meet him, when I first started out. And now, it's like 400 UFO cases later. Stanton means even more to me because of his adherence to the scientific method, the way that, and that he had an open mind throughout his whole life. He had an open mind, but he would want to back he was willing to accept the most outrageous things in our favored phenomena in the field, but he would want to have the scientific backing. He would want to have evidence. He was an evidence-based scientist, and he remained that way. Now to his dying day. So sadly that we lost him. But we have so much to learn from him. He was so worthy of our emulation, of my emulation. I just, when I grow up, I want to be like Stanton Friedman, pretty much.
Exactly.
Yes. And that's my personal anecdote. It's funny. I was planning on spending time with him and getting to know him this year at the symposium. It's strange how I worked with Kathleen Martin with the Experiencer research team, and Irena Scott. She was going to be on panels with Stanton and Denise Marcel is one of my closest, dearest friends. Denise and her husband Jim are, just dear. They're friends that I just love to hang out with. And so I was just kind of planning and knowing that I was going to be hanging out with Stanton this year at the symposium. And, that was not to be. It was not to be. But I feel so honored that I did get to meet him that first time. And he kind of set me on my own course. And that will always be meaningful and touching to me.
Thank you for those kind words, Earl. Those were wonderful. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, let's bring in, if we could, Ray Hernandez. Ray, can you come on in, please, and share some of your thoughts about Stanton Friedman?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you just fine, coming in loud and clear.
Well, I met Stanton through our free board of director, Miss Kathleen Martin, and I met him at two different conferences that we both spoke. And Kathy was always like white on rice, right next to Stanton all the time. And as you know, they wrote, I think, 3 books together. And they were very dear friends. And we would go out to lunch together or to dinner. And he was just a gentleman. He was an absolute attentive, kind, dear man. And as others have said, he was a scientist, and he brought scientific credibility to this phenomenon, which is so very important. And he always seemed to keep a distance to the experiencer phenomenon, because that's the work that I've been working on, and Kathy and the other 15 members of our free board of directors. But he was very receptive to it, because like many materialists, you have a difficult time dealing with concepts that mainstream science cannot explain. Like, for example, when he spoke about travel, most of the time he mentioned travel via nuclear propulsion rockets, getting you from one end of our galaxy to the other. But when it came to things that that are just unexplainable, he really had a difficult time going there, because he was a materialist science at heart. But credit to Mr. Friedman. He was one of the pioneers, together with some of the names that were mentioned before, that when you mention his name, Stanton Friedman, you put him up there with, Jacques Vallée, with Allen Hynek and the other major names in ufology. So it was a privilege and an honor to have met him. And I know that my dear friend Kathy Martin is very saddened by his passing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for those words, Ray. I want everybody to know that Ray Hernandez is co-founder of the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. And Ray, could you please share a few words about that wonderful foundation that you have?
Well, it's a foundation made up primarily of retired academic PhDs and other individuals like Kathy Martin, who I mentioned before, Leo Sprinkle, Mary Rodwell, that that had an interest in pursuing the topic of not only UFO contact experiencers, but we're also pursuing all of what we call the contact modalities. That's the topic of consciousness, the topic of near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, ghosts and spirits, and we have many other advisors and board members like Dr. Dean Radin, Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's one of the most important near-death experience researchers, um, uh, uh, Jeffrey Mishloff, who's a consciousness research scholar. And what we're trying to do is trying to understand what is the relationship between consciousness and contact with non-human intelligence via the contact modalities. It's a non-materialist approach. So that's why a lot of mainstream ufologists have such a difficult time with it. But people that study out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, ESP, consciousness, they have a very easy time because they know that our reality is consciousness based, non-material based. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Ray. We really appreciate your time today. And those were such wonderful words that you shared about Stanton with us today. And I wanted to go ahead and bring on someone we've been trying to reach you. We really love to listen to. It's the great Michael W. Hall, paranormal lawyer, head of the UFO IT. Michael, are you with us?
Yes, Chant, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, we
Loud
can
and
hear
clear.
you. How are you? You know, I know that you're at the McMinnville UFO convention out there in Oregon. How's it going out there?
Oh, it's a fantastic conference, just winding up this afternoon, actually, Frank and Chant. It was almost as if Stanton Friedman was here during the entire weekend, because it ended up being kind of a very family-friendly, almost eulogy, because all of the speakers were mentioning, Stanton's passing and kind of talking about stories regarding his life and his impact on ufology. So it was a really nice conference to go to right after a major event like this in ufology, so that people could kind of give their perspective on an iconic figure like Stanton Friedman, and really appreciate his life.
Thank you so much, Michael. I wanted to ask you a few questions about the conference you're at. I know that Peter Davenport was MC of this event. Is that correct?
Yes, for the 19th year in a row, Peter Davenport was the iconic MC for the entire event. He actually started out, but this is the 20th anniversary. I think Peter said he missed one conference there one year because of some major event in his life. Other than that, he has always been the calming kind of eidetic effect throughout the whole conference, that everyone really loves him down here in Oregon and likes to see him come on, kind of like grab the reins every year and bring all these fantastic speakers to the event. This was probably, it was the very first event that they say down here in McMinnville that they sold out all the tickets to this entire event, including the major speech and performance by Bob Lazar and Jeremy Corbell and David Fravor, the commander of the FA-18 off of the Nimitz, who saw the actual Tic Tac UFO. It was just like hearing right from the horse's mouth all of these amazing things that we've all heard about in ufology, but we had them all in one location this entire weekend.
Yes, and I'm wondering if you had the opportunity to actually see Alejandro Rojas, Karen Brard, and Stacey, Wright, and Jim Mann. Were you able to actually touch base with them, because they were just on at the beginning of the show paying tribute to Stanton?
Yes, I got to hang out with Alejandro during the day. In between the speeches, he always is very gracious and willing to take whatever time it takes and to kind of bring you up to speed. So I was really pleased to be able to talk with him at the conference as well. Alejandro was kind of behind the scenes on this conference. I was surprised that they didn't ask him to speak, but he kind of had a behind the scenes kind of flavor himself and added to the conference star-studded atmosphere himself by being here. So it was great to see him and the rest of the other speakers as well. We even had just this morning what they call the Speakers Breakfast, which is the most amazing event I've ever been at any UFO conference, where the speakers actually rotate from table to table, probably about a 10 top, round tables where you can buy the extra ticket and have actual breakfast with every speaker that's at the conference. They come and sit right at your table and answer your questions directly and take selfies with you, whatever you want. So we just wound up with that a few hours ago and had a wonderful time kind of following up with each of the speakers on their presentations with our personal questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for having taken the time. I wanted to also mention to folks that I believe, my understanding that this is the second time Bob Lazar has actually spoken at a conference. The first time was at Alejandro Rojas's and Karen Brard's UFO convention. That is at it was a UFO MegaCon, I believe. And that was the first time Bob Lazar spoke. The second time was at McMinnville, Oregon, at this UFO convention. Did you get a chance to listen to him speak?
Oh, yes, of course we did.
Okay.
It was a packed house. You couldn't find a standing room only position in the entire venue. Probably 1,000 people or so crammed into the conference hall to hear Bob speak. And it was just, it was very good to hear it right from his own mouth, his words and his impressions of his experiences, because we've all heard the stories, pros and cons. And when you hear it from him personally, it is very, very convincing.
Okay, wonderful. Michael, thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate your taking your time out of the schedule that you have over there. I know you've been very busy going from one conference to another, and also spending a lot of time talking to people that you enjoy being able to catch up with that you haven't seen in a long time. I did have one last question for you. Do you know, is Peter Davenport going to be a little bit later on today to join us before the end of the hour?
Peter I just saw him in his giant Crown Victoria wagon take out of the hotel parking lot. So he's on the road somewhere, and I doubt that he would want to probably do it while he's driving. So I tried to get him scheduled in for you today, because he definitely wanted to have some nice words to add to the eulogies that you're having today about Stanton Friedman. But I think the timing is going to be tough for him.
Okay. Well, we really appreciate your time so very much, Michael. And I hope that you have a wonderful and safe trip back home. And please tell the entire UFOI team we said hello. Are they there? By the way, we just want to hear them say hello if they happen to be right next to you.
They're not, Nick. Well, actually, yeah, one of them, my son, is here, Cameron. Just say hi to Chant and Frank. Hello.
Hi,
Hey.
Cameron. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. We just had an excellent weekend at the UFO Fest in McMenamins.
It's so wonderful to hear from you. Yes, please tell us just a little bit about it for yourself. We'd love to hear about it.
Well, it was a great family-friendly event. There was many speakers from, Frank? What was his first name? The guy who talked about the Star Wars stuff?
Oh, yeah, he was a professor, Finkelman.
Right.
David Finkelman was a professor at Linfield and had a really good presentation, along with Bob Lazar and, George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. It was just a huge event.
So many topics ranging from philosophy to forensics, science, and missing persons reports. It was very fascinating. I had a wonderful time. It was my first UFO event, actually.
Well, we would love to hear about that from you if you get a chance to join Michael on his wonderful talk show with the UFO I-Team. Michael, can you tell everybody about that show a little bit and also what websites to go to regarding that?
Oh, sure. Thank you. We do live stream our weekly meetings at the UFO I-Team live from Denny's, where America eats, every Monday night from 6 to 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So they just go to Facebook and punch in UFO I-Team with a lowercase I, and they'll find us all over that Facebook channel. And we have people joining us from all over the world and interacting with us at our Facebook Live meetings that way. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We're very appreciative of that. We also have the wonderful Dean Alioto. I wanted to see if he's on with us. Dean, are you here with us?
I am here. Can you hear me?
You sound
yes,
great,
we
Dean.
Can. I wanted to let our listeners know Dean is the movie director of Crashing Eden, an alien abduction incident in Lake County. And wanted to ask Dean, can you please share a little bit about yourself for our listeners?
Sure. I'm a filmmaker first and foremost, and an avid UFO researcher. That's kind of like my Clark Kent. My Superman role would probably be filmmaking first. I got into making movies with my first film right out of film school called UFO Abduction, which was a first found footage film. It just happened to be about UFOs because I had read Communion and some of Bud Hopkins' work, and definitely knew about Roswell and Stanton's work in that, and decided to incorporate that into a micro budget movie, which our budget was only $6,500, so I made basically a home video, and that's kind of how the whole found footage thing started. So I made this thing, and it was about a family in a cabin celebrating a girl's 5-year-old birthday party, and then one by one they get abducted, and so it was all shot at once in one take, and the movie got distributed, and then the distribution company burned in the ground. And I lost all my main master and artwork, and I thought that was it. And then 5 years later, I get a call from this guy saying, do you know what's been going on with your film? And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there's a copy that's been circulating around that probably went to a home video, like a mom and pop home video store. They got an advanced screener before the warehouse burnt down. So long story short, someone edited off the credits and injected it into the UFO community as the real thing. So it ends up at the International UFO Congress Convention in, I believe, 92. And so they were trying to track down anyone who knew about it. And I said, well, I did it. And they said, well, Unsolved Mysteries was interested. And I said, okay, I guess they're out because the mystery's over. And the guy who did this, his name was Sean David Morton, the infamous Sean David Morton. And he said, well, not necessarily. And I said, no, the mystery's been solved. What else do we have? And so he said, Encounters at Fox wants to do a special on it. So I went and did that. And then a few years later, I did a remake for UPN. It was their first UPN TV, their first TV movie with Dick Clark. And that one was called, the original title was called The McPherson Tape. And then we went out and shot it in Vancouver. Now our budget was $1.25 million. We got the guys from the X-Files to do the ship and the aliens. And it's essentially the same story. And while we were shooting, everyone got fired at UPN. So we came back with the first digital movie, the first TV movie that had no-name actors in it, that had 20-minute takes, that was handheld, looking like a home video. And it was easy for the new regime at UPN to kind of crap all over us. And so they cut it down. They hired someone else. They fired us, hired someone else to cut it from the 2-hour movie to a 1-hour. And this woman producer who came on board, who took over, decided that she was going to get a whole bunch of real interviews with actual people like Yvonne Smith, Daryl Sims, and the great Stanton Friedman. So she got them to comment on the UFO phenomenon in general and then intercut it so it looked like they were commenting on my film. And so it was very deceptive, something I never would have ever condoned. I didn't see it until it aired. And so flash forward 25 years later, and I get invited to go last year to the International UFO Congress Convention for the 25th anniversary of UFO abduction. And so my first experience that first day was sitting across from Stanton Friedman with Travis Walton and all these other luminaries. And I got a chance to apologize to him. And so I said, hey, Stan, just wanted to say, I'm really sorry. I had nothing to do with, with alien abduction. It's in Lake County. Sorry that you were co-opted into that. And then I waited for him to say either, yeah, I've been really pissed off about that, or, don't worry about it. Instead, he said, basically, son, do you know how many interviews and how many shows I've done? I can't keep track of all that. Don't worry about it one bit. It's totally fine. I've done thousands of these things, and you never know where it's going to go. Let that go. And so it was very gracious of him. And then I got a chance to engage in talking to him about, my favorite theme, flying saucers, as he would always refer to them, and talk about Roswell. And he was someone who loved a good debate, loved a great challenge. He had certain catchphrases that he would use over and over. And if it wasn't for him, Philip Glass, the pernicious, nefarious debunker, probably would not have been kept in check as much as he did, because thanks to Larry King, who would bring him on to counter Philip Glass. I look and I go, there's Alan J. Hynek, and then there's Dark Stanton. And except for maybe Jacques Vallée, I'm not sure, who's going to pick up the mantle. But he was a wonderful man, and his loss will be felt.
Thank you for those words, Dean. Really think that what you had to say was absolutely relevant and wonderful. And I wanted to know if you had any other stories you wanted to share about Stanton.
When there's a section at the UFO convention where you're seated with a bunch of other UFO researchers. And I had to do a lecture there, and Stanton was there, and he's got all of his stuff all spread out, and he sits there, and he kind of goes into, and also Travis would do this, they kind of go into this hibernation mode where they just kind of like shut down, and then someone will come up, walk up, and then boom, he's up. Stanton was supposed to retire. He had been working so hard, I think it was 83 or 84, but he just could not do it. He loved getting out in the world and loved great intellectual conversations and was an explorer. And so seeing him over there doing this, it was intimidating because, here's someone that has more energy, more vitality, was coherent and as sharp as they come. And so, again, that was really fun to see. He and then next to him would be Travis Walton playing the guitar and singing. It was this whole surreal thing. So I'm just honored to have been, in his orbit.
That's wonderful. Stanton Friedman is the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and co-authored Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. I just wanted to share a few facts in between guests so people can learn a little bit more about Stanton. And Dean, thank you so very much for your time. You're welcome to stay on the show with us if you'd like. But having had the opportunity to listen to you talk about Stan is a really wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Dean. Appreciate it.
Frank.
Oh, my pleasure.
I wanted to share a little bit about Stan also regarding a few other things. His top secret magic, his controversial book about the Magic 12 group, established in 1947 to deal with alien technology, was published in 1996 and went through 6 printings. An expanded new edition was published in 2005. Stan was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England in 2002 by UFO Magazine of the UK. He is co-author with He was co-author with Kathleen Martin, Betty Hill's niece, of a book in 2007 captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. I wanted to bring on a wonderful guest.
Before you do that, Chant, let me
ahead.
jump in really quick here. I'll say my 2 cents about Stanton Friedman, but I want to thank you, Dean Alioto, from the interview that you did with us the very early part of this year. It was actually very helpful. I think we've done better shows. I'm sure you didn't intend it, but actually talking to you about putting together stories and structures and how important that was, that has helped us get our shows a lot more organized. So I want to go ahead and thank you personally, Dean Alioto, for doing that for us. I don't think you intended it, but it worked out that way.
Well, I am very, very honored, and I will be sending you my bill for 10% of all the profits made.
There you go.
Now,
and go ahead.
Anything that I can, do to advocate. I mean, here's the thing. The research has been done forever. I mean, starting in the 40s, it really began there, and it might have been, beforehand. They probably didn't know what to call it, like the miracle at Fatima and all these other events that have happened. But for me, what I kind of hope to bring to the genre, if you will, is levity. When Alejandro Rojas said, hey, come out and speak at the convention, I was a little bit nervous because this field is rife with conspiracy theories, and the big term that's been coined to death is the rabbit hole. You don't want to go all the way in the rabbit hole. You want to leave some breadcrumbs for yourself. And the best researchers do that. Everything is always challenged. They're revisiting it, and Stanton certainly did that. And so Alejandro was like, no, come out and speak, and it'll be great. Everyone's got a good sense of humor, and they enjoy things. And so I did, and found everyone to be terrific. And the shows that you guys are doing are really fun and have a great spirit about them. And you're keeping it alive and keeping the discussion going, which is what needs to happen.
Thank you, Dean. I wanted to share a little story about Dean real quick, and that is, here I am interviewing people. It was a text-based form of interviewing last year, and really what that means is I just submitted a series of written questions to folks and then hoped they would respond. And some of the first people to kindly respond to my interview request, Jan Harzan, who I've interviewed multiple times, and a real privilege to have been able to do that. He came forward and kindly allowed an interview with him. And then also Dean. I reached out to Dean and very meekly asked him if he would consider an interview with me, and he was just so kind and generous, with himself regarding his discretionary time to actually have spent answering whatever questions he felt he could. Actually, what he did was he decided to forego the text-based interview and did a real live interview with me. And I've had 2 interviews with him. This is the 3rd time I've had the opportunity to talk to him. And I just want to thank you for, being so benevolent regarding, who you are. You're a high-profile person. You've had a lot of exposure in the media. You know a lot of folks out there. You have a lot of contacts, and everybody loves you and they love your work. And we just really appreciate your having taken the time to spend with us today.
Are you sure you're talking about me and not Stephen Bassett? Stephen's the man. Is he here?
Yes, he's here.
I think he's still listening. Yep, I think he's still
Come
on.
Come on. My head's already too big. Don't make it any bigger.
That was another treat for me, was sitting across from him, because he was there as well. It was Stan, and then it was Stephen. And it was, again, Stephen's a machine. I mean, this guy, you can put him anywhere and he can talk intelligently across the board on everything. And these guys are on the front line, constantly out there and everything. And so, I try to desperately bring a unique take to it, because it's been done so well and thoroughly by Stephen and several others. And so, the thing that's exciting is that every year things change and evolve. And whether through science or technology, and the thing that happened last December, was it last December or a year ago? December
December already.
My God, it went by fast.
It did.
That was a game changer, and it validates it a lot for all of us. And so I think that's, I think the timing is good, for this to get out. But anyway, thank you. You flatter me beyond belief and beyond.
Well, yes, and we are very grateful to have you on. Also, would like to thank. We're not ending the show. I just want to thank our guests, though, right now for having been just as generous about their time and as accessible as Stanton. Stanton went out of his way to make sure that he wasn't exclusive only to a few people, but the many. So we thank you for your time, and please do stay on the show with us. I wanted to bring on a really wonderful person onto the show. Her name is Dr. Irena Scott. She's an American author and physiologist. She received her BS from Ohio State University, an MS from the University of Nevada, and a PhD from the University of Missouri in the Department of Veterinary Medicine. Her postdoctoral studies were done at Cornell University, and it's just a real pleasure and honor for me to introduce her onto the show. I would also like to mention a book that she wrote before we start talking to her. She's written a few books. She also is a historian regarding Ohio. One of the books is 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up, and she'll go ahead and mention another book that she wrote recently. Dr. Irena Scott, it's a pleasure to have you on our show today. Are you there with us?
Certainly is an honor to be here. Thank you.
How are you?
Oh, just fine.
I mentioned one of your books. It's called UFO Today, 70 Years of Lies, Misinformation, and Government Cover-Up. Can you please mention the other?
Another one is Sacred Corridors, and this went into detail about Project Blue Book, and I had a lot of original documents, and I also had a number of original publications of Dr. Hynek's handwritten letters.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. Also, would you mind please sharing a little bit about yourself? One thing I want to tell our listeners before you talk a little bit about yourself is you have worked so hard regarding being a researcher in the realm of ufology and other phenomena. You've literally spent decades spending your own money, and I don't honestly think that, to me, from my perspective, you've tried to make a dime. If you make any money from your books, it's through hard work. And I just want everybody to know that Dr. Irena Scott is considered one of the foremost researchers in the field of ufology. And I would like you to share a little bit about your background regarding your research work.
Well, I worked in several of the places where UFOs were studied, such as the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, and I've been at Wright-Patterson a number of times for different meetings that were work-related, but where I found out a lot about UFOs, and at Battelle Memorial Institute, where the Special Report Study number 14 was done, which was mentioned earlier, and which Stanton Friedman frequently mentioned, and was able to find out a lot of behind-the-scenes stories about it. And yeah, I'm not making much money on my books, but I've always been a scientist, so that brings...
Well, I'm going to go ahead and recommend strongly UFOs Today. I've got a copy of that book. And even if you think you know a lot about UFOs, it is a great book. You will learn from it. And if you don't, it might be the perfect book for you to pick up if you really don't know a whole lot and you're just getting into it. It's well worth the investment. You'll save yourself a lot of time because so much is covered throughout the history of UFOs. It is a fantastic book. I highly recommend.
Well, thank you
for that.
And I go into a lot of the research I did on that, which contains some pretty interesting stories.
That's wonderful. Irene, I wanted to ask you, can you please share any stories or perhaps experiences you've had with the late Dr. Stanton Friedman?
Yes, I think he was everywhere, and then some. I was lucky enough to meet him several times and served on the MUFON board of directors with him. And I was honored to be on a plan panel with him and Kathleen Marden at this year's MUFON symposium. And so I'm very disappointed that I'm not going to see him. Of course, I'm lucky I'll see Kathleen Marden. I thought his columns in the MUFON Journal were excellent. and showed about the most scientific thinking in the UFO field, as were his debates. He was a voice of science in our field, and I'll always remember talking to him and asking him questions, and him just pulling out papers that were redacted and covered with black marks. I recently talked to Jenny Zeidman about him, and she worked intensely with Dr. Hynek and knew him. Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. We can hear you. You're okay.
Okay.
But I didn't get her reminiscence about him, so I'm sorry.
Well, we really appreciate your having spent a little bit of time to talk about Stanton today, and wanted to know also, what's your perspective about Stanton in general in the realm of ufology? How do you feel he represents it?
Well, I think he represented the field of science very well, and I especially liked his columns in the MUFON Journal because he went into his debates and how he had logical answers to things, as Dr. Hynek did too, that would support a scientific outlook. And he was a scientist, so I thought this added immensely to the UFO field, and he contributed a whole lot.
I agree with you. There's not very many scientists out there who are willing to actually put themselves in the kind of position that Stanton did, and speak freely about his perspectives regarding the realm of ufology. Frank, can you mention a few scientists you feel are involved in ufology right now?
Well, right now, we've added Professor Kevin Knuth. Hal Puthoff has been involved for a long time. Jacques Vallée has been mentioned already. We've had the passing recently of Stanton Friedman, and Steve Bassett had mentioned James McDonald going back some distance. Yeah, there are a few of them out there. We could use a few more, though. No doubt about that.
Very true. Irena, also wanted to ask you, how do you feel about Stan's personality and how he came off to people when he approached them? What I'm getting from everybody is that he was extremely approachable and very friendly to everybody, no matter who they were.
Yes, and he used to sit at the conventions at his table selling books. And, of course, everybody came up and asked him questions. And he was friendly to everybody. And when he was, I was on the board with him, and he was very much respected also there.
And of course, I do want to mention Irena Scott is a scientist too, involved actively in the field. My bad.
The thing that I also want to kind of underscore here with Irena as a perfect example is these scientists, serious scholars, you know, from Cornell and like, you know, John Mack from Harvard, they have more at stake to lose than we do in a lot of ways because, you know, they're part of the institute, part of something that's ingrained in empirical logic, and they're stepping outside of that. And that affects not only their livelihood, but it affects, you know, reputations and stuff. And so I find that always when someone finds that the evidence is so compelling that they're willing to venture out in this, you know, pseudo existential research, that takes, you know, a lot of bravery. And so my hat's always off to, you know, anyone that does that comes from that academia.
Well, Steve, go ahead. Yeah, Steve actually wanted to ask you a question while Irena is talking. If you wouldn't mind, I'll jumping in on this, and that is, Steve, how do you feel about scientists being involved in the realm of ufology and other phenomena?
That's to me, Chant?
Yes, Steve, yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you brought that up. Let me expand on something you said a little bit earlier. You referred to Stan as Dr. Friedman, and that's a common mistake. A lot of people
I'm
do.
sorry. I caught that after I said it. It's incorrect. Sorry.
It's okay. Stan had a Master of Science. He was a practical physicist, not a theoretical, and a Master of Science in that field was more than enough to work back in his time. But as it happens, Stan Friedman, in all of his career, never received an honorary doctorate from any university. And to my knowledge, no science, professional scientist involved in this field has ever received an honorary doctorate. I once went into my to the president's office of my college, where I graduated, to talk about this idea. And he personally escorted me out of his office without comment, which is basically a dismissal with full prejudice. This is simply one of many reflections of the fact that the failure of the 5,000 colleges and universities in the United States for 70 years to engage this issue properly, other than the odd vanity course, is probably the greatest intellectual failure in all of human history. Okay, now it's changing. There's no question. We're seeing academics of PhD level coming forward and saying things. The Harvard professor recently, the head of Harvard astronomy, just came out and was talking about Umarahu as a possible, an actual intelligent craft or intelligent origin. He seems to have survived that. And there's been some others, but nevertheless, we're still in the early stages of the entire academic community in America figuring out the truth of this matter. So I just announced about a week ago that I started a new project. It's in the very early stages, and it's called Academics for Disclosure, AD. That's intentional, right? And it's tricky, but my intention is this, and it's modeled after architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. There are like 3,000 that have come out to indicate that they're very dissatisfied with the explanation of some of the physical aspects of the 9/11 events. That's a lot of architects and engineers. So this is designed to obtain signatures from anyone with a PhD, credited PhD or MD, or anyone teaching in college or university level, regardless of their degree, to sign to a statement that I paraphrase here, that I such am convinced that there is an extraterrestrial presence engaging the planet, and fully support the disclosure or announcement of that by our government. It's worth noting that Stan, remember Robert Bigelow in May of 2017 came forward on 60 Minutes and said there's an extraterrestrial presence here, and he's a billionaire NASA contractor. And in normal times, that would have got him in front of the U.S. Congress in about 2 weeks. But of course, it was just slipped by, right? Because there's so much other nonsense going on. Stan, for years, has said, matter-of-factly, there is an extraterrestrial presence engaging us. He was absolutely unambiguous about that. I can't say the same for Jacques Vallée, but Stan always has said, not always, but he said this, at least for the last 20 years, and that's important. So anyway, Academics for Disclosure. So what I'm doing now, I'm in the nascent stage. I'm slowly gathering and approaching people who have that PhD or MD as to see whether they would be willing to participate. And I'm putting it out there so that people might contact me at paradigmresearchgroup.org, where I have my email address and subscription list to the emails. But nobody's going to be named. And this is not going to go public until there are a significant number of people, so that they're not by themselves. There's a decent group. How many that is, I don't know. But the number one barrier right now to executing this program is I'm going to have to get hold harmless releases from anyone that participates. Now, what that means is a harmless agreement is basically an agreement that says, but in legal language, that should any harm come to my status, my career, my professional position, and so forth, as a result of my signing on to this statement, I hold harmless Paradigm Research Group for any damages and so forth.
Well, let
And
me
for
jump
me,
in here. Steve, if I could really quick ask you about this. The way you have
sure.
this worded, that they are definitely signing on to saying, yes, they believe or they think that there is an ET presence. Wouldn't you have a little bit more success if you weasel worded that a little bit, that there might be, or it's worth a closer look or something along those lines? You might get a better response.
Yeah, this is not a. Yeah, I appreciate that, Frank. Good point. Though, that's not me. That's not my style. You probably know that. The thing is, this is not a petition. It's not about getting huge numbers of signatures. It's about getting a decent number of signatures that goes directly to the heart of the truth. That has more power, even if the numbers are lower. In other words, I'm trying to get people to do and say exactly what Bob Bigelow said on 60 Minutes. And I don't know if Bob has a PhD. I don't think he does.
He can hire them, though.
But he's not, so he wouldn't be eligible. But so I'm wanting statements that strong, but not only about the presence of ETs engaging the planet, however the PETs want to, but also supporting that it's time for the government to finally confirm this. So getting back to it, we are still at a time where I have to have that hold harmless, because there is still a chance that certainly if, say, 100 people sign on, one or two are suddenly going to find themselves facing down the dean of their universities and maybe getting hurt. That's why I'm limiting it to high school and college teachers. I don't want, college and university teachers. I do not want any high school teachers. They're much too vulnerable. But I still have to do this because we're still not there yet. Nevertheless, we'll see how it goes. If I get enough people that are willing to go there, then this Academics for Disclosure project will get a full launching with a press conference, probably at the National Press Club. And we'll take another step forward. We're right on the cusp. And we're so close to disclosure now, given what's coming down the pike later this year, that I definitely don't want to hurt anybody at the last minute. It's like the poor soldier that's the last soldier to get killed before the armistice is signed. But I just like the idea of starting it and getting it out there and having people think about it. But Academics for Disclosure will be this project. And hopefully it will be the beginning of the academic community in the United States and most of the rest of the world, frankly, Europe, UK, of somehow, in spite of all their genius and all their IQs and all their degrees, somehow, by some strange circumstance, they all managed to completely miss the ET reality of the last 70 years, the 5,000, 6,000, 8,000 books that were written, the endless documentaries, the films, the evidence, et cetera, et cetera. They just sort of missed it, and so consequently didn't think, well, nothing to see here, no reason why I'd want to teach about this. This must never happen again in this country. It's happened in fascist dictatorships in the past, where an entire academic community, for fear of having their bullet in their brain, essentially just said, we're not going to talk about this, even though it's worth studying. But this is the United States. And we're not a fascist dictatorship, at least not yet. And so the idea that all 5,000 colleges and universities stood down on this for 70 years, that must never be repeated about any important aspect of our reality, any science, ever again. And let's hope that's the case.
If you have a separate list for college film school dropouts, I'll sign up there. I have a question for you, and it was funny at the convention when we were hanging out. I forgot to ask this of you, but since you're the godfather of disclosure here.
No, please don't say that. It makes me
There's a paternity test that's being done to see if this is true, that you are the actual godfather.
Nice.
So here's my question. When I think of disclosure, I wonder if there isn't a version of that has already happened, in the sense that from the aliens' perspective, I wonder if they feel they've already done a disclosure. When you look at the Ariel school in Zimbabwe, all the other people that they've reached out to, I did some math on how many people who claim to have been abducted, how that, if you take those numbers in the United States and open it worldwide, you end up with 40 million if you track these numbers. 40 million out of 7 billion people. And so if these people are being contacted, is that a form, I'm curious what your take is that a form of disclosure where they're disclosing to the people that they want to? They're not going to disclose to, politicians and everyone who could usurp them. And so are they doing quietly their own disclosure to chosen people, if you will? What is your take on that?
This is a semantic issue, really. The term disclosure is a term that's very much open to broad interpretations. This is often the case in fields of endeavor, including activism. And one of the key things that activist movement has got to do as to create defined specific terminology as to what the goal is. Otherwise, things get kind of messy. Disclosure, as I say, with a small d, has been happening in every field. I mean, there's disclosure of small d of stuff about all kinds of things all the time. But in terms of the ET issue, it's been going on consistently for thousands of years. Just watch Ancient Aliens a few hundred times, which I have, and you sort of see something's going on there. But the small d disclosure, as I define it for the activist movement, is revelations about this phenomena emerging from all kinds of sources, witnesses, raw research, government statements even, and the actions of ETs. But I see the actions of ETs not as less as disclosure, as more as manipulation. In other words, it's my view the ETs want us to do a disclosure event. They want a self-disclosure event to happen on the planet by heads of state, formal confirmation, because that then opens the door for another level, meaning it opens the door to massive global engagement of the issue, right? Meaning all the colleges will jump on board, the scientists will jump on board, everybody's on board, and we'll just be drenched in ET stuff, and everything will have ETs on it. You want to buy underwear, there'll be little aliens on it, and T-shirts and God knows what, and we'll be sick of ETs after 2 years, which opens the door for low stress direct open contact. So I think they're facilitating it by not being discreet, by allowing themselves to be seen. And that is a deliberate, though I think they're also maybe conducting work at the same time. The disclosure that the advocate movement is focused on, and this is what I say, others could disagree, but this is what I've been saying for a long, long time, is a very precise, specific thing. It is only the formal confirmation or formal acknowledgement of this presence, of this ET presence reality, by the heads of states of nations. President of the U.S., Prime Minister of UK, President of Russia, President of China, and so forth, all the way down the line. It'll probably start with a single nation that will make the first move, and then other nations will follow very quickly in line, because every nation in the world that's relatively developed with a modern air force, relative to the time, going even back to the 50s, knows there's an ET presence because they've been doing gun camera footage, intercepts of these craft all these years. And all of that, of course, has been filed and put under classification. So these countries know there's an ET presence, but they're deferring to either the United States, maybe Russia, maybe China, to make the first move. They don't want to make the first move. So it is that is disclosure, capital D. Anything other than that is not capital D disclosure. That is not the goal. The goal of the advocacy movement, the truth advocacy movement, is not to get some more research. I hope we have more research, but we've had enough research to prove this issue 20 times over. It's not to get maybe somebody in the Pentagon to come forward, or maybe the odd senator to say something. That's all fine. Disclosure, the event, the paradigm shift, the door to the post-disclosure world, that is got to be and only can be the formal confirmation by the heads of state. And so that is my way of minimizing the confusion. Now, after you step away from that very hard very well defined. And you get into the small d disclosure. Well, there's all kinds of views about what that is or isn't and what have you, and that's all great. What's important is that the era of the UFO ended in 1991, as far as I'm concerned, though the UFO hangs around. God knows that acronym is a stubborn little sucker, and it's going to be around for a while. But it's clear over the last 5-6 years that the language and the conversation is shifting from talking about UFOs to talking about disclosure. It's coming up all the time in all the context. And of course, it came up in a lot of articles that I helped to generate during the last election. Nearly 400. The term is turning up. And when you go to the conferences, like when I go to Contact in the Desert to speak on the 31st of May, or when I go to speak at Alien Con Los Angeles on the 21st of June, I assure you, disclosure is what those people are wanting to hear about. There's even the disclosure is turning up in the names of a number of the lectures. It is finally arrived. That is what's important. UFO is a meaningless term. It's about something in the sky you don't understand. It could be a flock of seagulls. Flying saucers, still important, but we know about flying saucers. We've got photos of them. What we really don't know is when the government is going to finally confirm this so that we can really get into this on a global level, all countries, all peoples. And that is still out there. It hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. It is inevitable. And that's
Steve.
what I talk about.
I'm very grateful for you have shared that with us. And Jan, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to make a comment about the topic that Steve is covering right now. I don't know if Jan can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and move on to Rich.
No,
Jan, are you there?
I'm
Okay,
on.
go ahead.
Yeah, so here's the deal. There are people who have information within our government. Some of that information is classified based on the fact that it represents a national security threat, much like Stephen brought up earlier with regard to Stanton Friedman. But I would say that there was just an article released moments ago to the Hill, which is a magazine for those on Capitol Hill, asking Congress to take action on this UFO subject. I think it's a well-written article. It cuts to the heart of the matter. The fact of the matter is that most of our, if not all of our, elected officials are completely in the dark on this subject. I think it points up to the fact that some of the things that Stephen Greer has been saying. I know people either love or hate Stephen, but that these USAPs are so the way this stuff happens is so compartmentalized that even the guys running our highest intelligence, military, congressional committees and groups aren't even read in on it, and that's it's totally out of control in my opinion. But those that are trying to do the best job for the American people and the government of the United States, I think are going to make some headway. And you can read about it yourself in the Hill. We'll have it posted on our website hopefully today. So I think we need to stop bashing people who are trying to get this information out, trying to get our Congress to take action on it, trying to make some headway and get the general public and the scientists interested in this. I will tell you that since the announcements of December 16th, 2017, I am getting calls literally weekly by scientists, engineers, academics, corporate people wanting to get involved with MUFON, and we're trying to come up with a way to do that. Probably through some kind of an advisory council, because most of these people have held huge high positions within their companies, within their academic credentialed world. They're not interested in becoming necessarily an FI investigator and working their way up to be a state director, but they want to participate. They want to take action on it. So I think what Stephen's talking about is terrific in terms of calling that out. I find most of them are now willing and open to having their names used publicly in this regard. So we have taken a gargantuan leap forward from where we were in the last 70 years in just the last year and a half. And I think a lot of that's for some of these brave souls who've stepped out and tried to make this happen. So yeah, I'm very positive. I think we've entered a whole new era in ufology, or just call it, people like to use the words UAP because that's socially acceptable in these types of circles. But it's UFOs, guys. It's UFOs. And we've been talking about it for 50 years at MUFON and another 20 plus years before that. I just think we've got a huge opportunity ahead of us to educate the public. And trust me, there are going to be people out there who are going to be in denial. I mean, we're going through a grieving process here. You look at the Kubler-Ross model, and, the first answer when you realize that you've been lied to for the last 50 years is after denial, you go into anger. And there are going to be a lot of people very angry that they were lied to. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people who are excited about the fact that they can now stand up in their academic circles, in their congressional circles, in their work world circles, and they can actually say and talk about the subject of UFOs, which is really going to propel us forward, I think, as a human species. So I'm really excited about it. I think the great work Stephen's been doing, Paradigm Group and Dr. Greer was trying to push things, and 101 other people in the academic and world. I think it's all coming together. We're all part of the same body, the body of ufology, and we need to take care of each other, and we need to embrace each other, and we need to help usher this new world in, because it's coming faster than we all know.
Yeah, just to jump in really quick here.
Chant, can I?
Yeah. I just want to follow up on something that Jan said really quick. The article that he mentioned in The Hill is an op-ed piece written by Christopher Mellon from the To the Stars Academy and former Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary for Intelligence. So that article's available over on The Hill, so go check that out. It's well worth a read.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sorry to interject, Frank and Jan. Wanted everybody to know that was Jan Harzan, International Director of MUFON, who was speaking, and wanted to ask Rich Hoffman if he had any comments regarding the topic right now that we're covering. Okay, Rich, I'm not sure if you can hear us.
There he is.
Okay, go ahead.
I just had to unmute. I mean, the things that are being raised are really, really, really relevant to the entire phenomena. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as I was listening to it, it seemed like back in the days of Project Blue Book, when that was going on, it seemed like, you had an era of credibility when you were trying to do something from a scientific standpoint, because, hey, look, the government's looking into it, and they're taking it and treating it seriously. And then you felt like your legs were cut out from you when Project Blue Book closed, and the Academy of Sciences that said pretty much that they concurred with the Condon report and everything else. And so you struggled with getting scientists engaged. I'm encouraged right now, and I think Jan's pointing out something that we're also experiencing even in SU, is that right now, I think we have like 14 PhDs that have come on board, and we're probably going to get 2 more, and they're both academics from the University of New York that are a part of us, and really wanting to engage this. And I think that the reason why is we've moved beyond just anecdotal, I saw a UFO in the sky, to the point where you've got radar, you've got some data that scientists actually like to have. And it's when you have that legitimate data, something that they can mull over, that they can analyze and do something with it, that we start to now see them engaging. And I think that if you take a look at just the Nimitz case and some of the other cases we're getting, where we're actually getting military grade equipment that's actually picking up on some of this, or the credibility of having an entire carrier group that's out there that's like witnessing it, and somebody with the respectability of a Commander Fravor that's willing to come on the line and talk about these things. All help us, but there's still the challenges. I mean, like, for example, 2 of the academics that want to come on board are waiting until it's appropriate for them, from their academic pushback that they will get, to be able to do that. And I think I pointed out we've gotten rid of the word UFO, because we found out from the conference we had here, a lot of people don't like that term because it associates with the baggage that they have experienced around the subject. So we've kind of adopted, going the UAP route, primarily because maybe that helps with a conversation And we also ran into that from the military side, who said, "Oh my God, you can't use UFO." And I'm going, and oh wow, really? So
even though, Rich, UFO was originally a military acronym, it was coined by Edward Ruppelt.
Oh well, sure, but then the period of all the exactly, and over the period of decades, you watch as that whole thing is morphed into a whole lot of other kinds of meanings to it. I mean, going back to this being a topic about Stanton Friedman, I was encouraged. The book that got Stanton interested was the report on unidentified flying objects by the former head of Project Blue Book, Captain Ruppelt.
Same here.
That's the book that got me interested, and so military called them UFOs, and we can thank Ruppelt for helping us to get that term on the books. But it's now one of those things that people struggle with in wanting to engage the subject because it's got so much baggage. But anyway, I'm hoping that we can get more science engaged and we can get past the invisible college and instead make it a visible college, and that people will be coming out. And I'm encouraged to see that we're now starting to get a lot of those people that want to do that. So keep it up, and hope we can make things happen.
Can I just interject?
Sure, absolutely.
He wants to say something. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, if I may, I wanted to follow up on something that Jan said, take a little further. And I want to be very clear about this. I mean, I've talked about it at length. I'm going to be speaking about it at these upcoming conferences. The To the Stars Academy, this group that came together, went public, formally announced on October 11th of 2017 that I believe was supposed to and intended to announce their existence in December of 2017, were intended to announce in 2016. This group, in fact, is a formal, structured, planned project initiated within the Department of Defense in cooperation with the CIA and probably other agencies, or we could say the military intelligence complex, to get and take another step and get this issue into play, connected back to the military intelligence complex by proxy, in order to show the world that, in fact, the position within these agencies, including the DoD, has in fact shifted towards revealing this truth to the American people. Disclosure is not an easy thing. It's a rollout process. It's extremely complicated with a large history. And the DoD is not the president. The DoD cannot disclose. It cannot be the disclosure entity. It works for the president. Only the president can do disclosure. But the DoD has made the decision that they will actually take this step and allow these individuals, which they could stop this anytime they wanted to come forward, be the vehicle for releasing the first gun camera footage and other things which are coming out. And so what it means is that there is now a sufficient sentiment within the military intelligence complex for having a head of state announce the extraterrestrial presence. And there's no way they can put this toothpaste back in the tube. It's out, it's done, and it's going to go forward. And the only reason it hasn't gone much, much further is that the political situation right now is so chaotic that it has sort of kept that from advancing.
Okay, and thank you very much for that. I know that Dean Alioto had a question for Steve.
Hey, Steve. Well, it's for everyone, really. It's interesting because there's a generation, I call them the experiment generation, because they're growing up on technology, which has actually brought the world much closer together. So if you're a kid, you could have a pen pal in our day, right, to other countries and stuff, and now you just get online and that's it. So in a lot of ways, we're more global than we've ever been in the history of mankind. And what that's done is, like, when we were kids, we were interested in UFO, Bermuda Triangle, Bigfoot. We're all kind of considered weirdos that it was some strange esoteric thing. And now people are open up to all that stuff. The programming that I wanted to see as a kid is now available on Netflix and everything. So this is something that there's always been interest in, but never properly kind of marketed in a way, if you will. The other end of the pendulum with that is you've got the people who run with the conspiracies and go online and do stuff like the flat earthers and everything else. And so we kind of exist somewhere in between, but we want to be more on the, like quantum theory. It's all theory. There's more evidence here in the flying saucers and stuff that has been reported and seen, Phoenix lights, etc. You could put away someone for murder. This would equal that. It's more convincing. And so when I think about stuff like getting the word out and getting people to go there, I think that they're pretty much already there. When I think of the president needing DOD or DOD needing the president, I don't understand if a president will come out. I mean, it made sense that I understand right around Eisenhower and maybe up to Nixon, maybe Reagan, possibly Bush Sr., because he was with the CIA, knew exactly what was going on. But if you're in the office for 4 to 8 years, there's a chance that you don't need to know that information unless something is coming where they need to be, prepped so it doesn't they get caught with their, pants down, if you will. So I guess my observation here is whether it's DOD or some, black ops or whatever it is, it's been around for a long, long time. And so unless it serves a purpose, it seems that the government only does things to serve we only invade a country because of oil, because of this or that. So when it becomes something to serve a purpose, I feel like that's when it's going to come out. It's always a matter of incentivizing. And so whether the people are calling for it and everything, what is the incentive going to be for the government, I guess is my question.
Okay, and so that was a question for Steve, correct?
Anyone.
Okay, anyone.
Open.
Anyone want to jump in?
I'll take that. I can say for sure that during the Truman years, Truman was very plugged into all this. Beyond that, it's a little trickier. We do know that there's some presidents, like Ford for sure during his congressional days, Carter had a sighting, Reagan was fascinated and apparently had a sighting. So, yeah, but even for a president, it's not going to be UFOs 24/7. I think that's some of the issue with the military as well. These things pop up once in a while, now and again, here and there, all over the face of the earth. So is it a 24/7 thing? I don't think that it is. Obviously, there are other things that are pressing top military guys, top presidents. We don't know, and this is I think important. Even though, like at the SCU conference, Elizondo was asked specifically about this. Does he have an idea on frequency? He says he doesn't. I think that's an important question to answer. We all have, I think, are on the same page as far as thinking that at least some of these UFOs might be ET, and I certainly think that's the case. I go a little further than that, but how many? How often is it happening? If we accept that it's happening at all, how often? Is it happening a couple times a year, a couple times a month, a couple times every day? That changes the parameters of the debate quite a bit. And I think we're not seeing that. So that's why we're not seeing the full steam ahead effort from the very top military people, the president, and so on. That's my opinion. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
We do have someone who wants to jump in, and thank you so much for that perspective, Frank. Really appreciate it. We have Earl Gray, who is the chief investigator for the Southern California chapter of MUFON. Earl, would you please chime in on this topic?
Sure. Hello there, Chant. Hello, Frank, everybody. So I don't know. As far as official disclosure goes, I may differ from some of you guys' opinion. I don't know if the president came out and if he announced that extraterrestrials were here among us and visiting us, half of the country would believe him and the other half, I don't even know if half the country would believe him because things have gotten so partisan recently. I mean, I think that Ronald Reagan could have done that. I think that, but I think that things have become so partisan that I don't know if that's even the right venue to bring disclosure to the public through now. I mean, who does everybody trust? Tom Hanks, maybe. I'm trying to think of. I mean, half of the country would think that it was a false flag, and the other half would just think that he was, they're trying to divert our eyes, from this issue and that issue. So I don't even know. I still adhere to the idea that I think that we are disclosure. I think that it's slow. That we are slowly. It's kind of a drip system. Maybe this is true trickle down. You've seen it in economics, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But perhaps this is their manner of disclosure is through us, and it's been going on for a long time. Whether in film or things like Star Trek, Star Wars, and now of course I guess the new show from the To the Stars Academy guys. I think that's going to be an important thing. I think that MUFON, that we've had our toe in that particular pool with things like the Hainer One show that we had at one time. That disclosure is slowly, it's by slow immersion, I think. But I don't know that if anybody, I don't think that there's any one person that could get up and announce that we're being visited and that UFOs or UAPs are a real phenomena that everybody would accept.
Well, it's funny because just to interject quickly, the Tic Tac footage, New York Times, Pulitzer Prize, I mean, it was presented in the best possible, it was a dream sequence for us, right?
Yes, it was.
And the whole world didn't collapse. Religions didn't end or become zealots. It was a big story for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they didn't cue the X-Files soundtrack when they recorded the story. And everyone, the attitude across the board, when I was trying to get the gauge, the temperature of it was kind of like, yeah, we already assumed that was the case. So cool, nice footage. Moving on, integrate it into our life and go back onto social media and make sure you get a lot of likes on Facebook.
Yeah, back to Game of Thrones,
Yeah, Steve, you wanted to jump in here. I know we've got a lot of people on, so go ahead, Steve.
Quickly, here's my response to Earl. When the president of the United States, or it could be president of Russia, it could be president of China, but let's just talk about the United States. When the president of the United States goes in front of that microphone at the end of Cross Hall in the East Wing and tells the press there's an extraterrestrial presence, he's not going to say, or she's not going to say, there's an extraterrestrial presence, believe me. No. They're going to announce the extraterrestrial presence, and then, probably right then, if not immediately the next day, substantial evidence is going to be released by the Department of Defense, way beyond what we've seen from the To the Stars Academy, I can assure you, that will leave absolutely no doubt whatsoever in anybody's mind. And then furthermore, other countries will immediately follow with their own announcements and their own evidence coming from their military. So you don't think of it as like a single announcement. Who's going to believe it? I assure you, it will be locked down within a day and solid. And in other words, for disclosure to happen, there has to be a coming together of the Department of Defense in the United States and the White House. That has never happened. But what we know now from the To the Stars Academy's activity is that in their own way, the Department of Defense is sending out the message, we're ready to do business when you're ready to get down to business. And the other thing I want to mention is the Department of Defense cannot disclose the ET presence, just like the Department of Defense cannot declare war. The DOD can't declare war. Only the Congress can declare war. Right. So be assured there will be no ambiguity with the disclosure event. And while a few people may hold out, the vast majority of the world's public will be on board within days.
So what you're saying basically, Steve, is that if they made that kind of an announcement, they'd have the evidence to back it up. They wouldn't just say something.
They will have evidence from their world, from their files, some of which we've never seen, more gun camera footage, you name it, that will just absolutely make it clear. They'd be crazy not to. And that's why you're seeing what the activist movement has been trying to do all along is to try to persuade the Department of Defense and the White House to get together, come up with the method to get this out and end it. And we haven't been able to do it yet. But Tom DeLonge and the fellows of the To the Stars Academy, what can I say? They have been allowed to take a major step in that direction. And as I said before, the To the Stars Academy was probably supposed to be announced right after the election of 2016, based upon what they thought was going to happen. The election did not turn out like they thought. And as a result, it threw their plans up in the air and created a significant problem. And it took them 11 months before they could make the decision to announce in October of 2017. They went ahead with the articles in the New York Times, which they generated. And the political hurricane we're in is still so intense that those major events sort of got sucked into the void. And so they sort of backed off. But as you know, new developments are coming. The Unidentified show launches on the 31st. You're going to see some amazing stuff coming out of that program, and expect much more from the To the Stars Academy.
Thank you very much for having covered all that. I wanted to ask Irena, Dr. Irena Scott, we've gone over a plethora of topics here. Did you have any comment about any of them, Dr. Scott?
I've worked through ResearchGate, a scientific organization, and started a project to get PhD scientists interested in the UFO phenomena. And I had an award not too long ago for the amount of people that read the material and were interested. So at least there's some interest in among scientists that I hope will bring people forth too. I think with disclosure, I think that probably the UFO phenomena needs to do it themselves too, because I don't know if having the government say things will actually convince people.
What great insight that is to say that. I agree with you, Irena. And I wanted to ask Rich Hoffman, didn't you have a comment you wanted to make to Steve Bassett regarding evidence and about alien or crashed saucers and about scientists arguing the evidence to death? How do you feel about that? Could you please chime in about that regarding your comment to Steve?
Well, I'm just saying that there have been so many cases that are incredibly documented. There's a lot of cases. The Iran case is one of those things that I think about. It's a DIA. I've been involved in this for I guess 55 years, and I've always been saying, what would it take for me to get evidence that would actually indicate that there's actually something here? And we've always thought that we would get some sort of maybe like metals or something like that would be a good indicator. And then how would you justify the fact that is from off Earth? And then people would come up and speak and say that, well, it's going to have a different isotopic ratio, or it's going to have other kinds of characteristics that we can't combine with other metals. And then you watch as every time something like, what you think to be a good case is brought up, it's basically just, ignored or dismissed, or it's never really amounted to much. When you look at even those wonderful, hearings like Steve had, I watched that whole week in awe of just that whole mock congressional hearing, because I think we were trying to lay out the cards, and you saw all those congressional leaders saying, wow, gee, I didn't know this, and this is great stuff. And then you'd hope that would go somewhere. And so I guess I spent my entire life hoping that we'll get something that would be considerable evidence that would allow something like a president to come forward. And I think that it would almost have to be on the scale that one crash in downtown Washington, or it landed there, or there would be some incredible evidence that would be looked at by many, 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 many scientists from different fields, and they would somehow agree, because a lot of them, there's a lot of, even within science, there's a lot of stuff that gets peer reviewed and people just don't accept it. And so there's a tremendous amount of skepticism about TTSA, especially even within the UFO community. I mean, they even attack them all the time. But I work with the Army and a headquarters, 4-star headquarters, and I don't see any interest whatsoever by any of the people there in this topic. And so, man, it's going to take some very, very serious stuff. And I'm hoping that people like Steve and even Jan at MUFON and that we all continue to get this message through in the United States, which seemingly has adopted this, whatever policy that, and I understand part of that policy because I work with the national security agreement kinds of like thing myself. And I know that there's a large degree of caution about talking about certain things. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a tremendous cultural change that's going to have to happen. Hopefully that we'll keep up with it. We'll keep putting pressure on, trying to get, people to understand this. And we are challenged, as Earl pointed out, where you've got, a president that says something right now, and unfortunately, half of the country dismisses it, and and the other half maybe believes it wholeheartedly, and it's just there's so much mistrust of that, even in the with millennials out there, and these are the people that are coming up after I go off like Stanton did. I mean, it's like there's going to be that millennial group, and my God, the critical thinking is gone on that group. And oh, by the way, there are multiple civilizations of aliens out here, and they, and they buy and believe everything. I mean, so, wow. I'm just very concerned about how we're going to get there. I'd love it if that were the case, but wow. It's going to take a tremendous, tremendous thing to happen.
Well, Steve, how do you feel about that?
Let me jump in here really quick. Let's bring Steve back in on this. Steve, we talked about this before when you were on with us last year, that the interest in the UFO subject has, in fact, over the years been bipartisan. Would it not take a sort of a bipartisan effort to do a full and proper disclosure that you're talking about?
Let me rephrase that. Disclosure, the policy of the government on the ET issue is not scientific. It's political. The evidence for the extraterrestrial presence has been piled up. It's 10 times over. If this was simply an evidentiary matter, we would have gotten probably disclosure about 1953. We almost got it in 47, but they turned the story around before the press got to Roswell. The political decision was made to embargo the issue. It's like the embargo of Cuba. The embargo of Cuba is not a science issue. It's a political issue. The government doesn't want you to go there. And if you go there, it'll hurt you. It's the same thing with the ET issue. The government does not want academics, doesn't want the media, or just anybody in general to probe or push too hard into the ET issue. It's embargoed for national security reasons. All right. So the answer to it is political. Disclosure will be a political act, not a scientific act. The evidence that the government will provide obviously will be scientific, but it will be to substantiate the political act. And because disclosure is a political act, it's very much impacted by political developments. And there's this whole history of the last 50 years about the political circumstances under Clinton versus Bush versus Obama versus Trump. All of which were very significant in terms of whether or not disclosure was possible. The fact is, we have had a very tumultuous 40 years of politics, enormous amounts of controversy, and that has not helped. The current situation right now is definitely awkward because we have a president who, as a matter of habit, is a very mendacious person. And so if a person who is known to work with the truth on a regular basis comes out and announces the ET presence, a little awkward. But there is one compelling
let me jump in here. Yeah, let me jump in here really quick, Steve, because our current president has talked about a deep state a state that has worked against him, that is not telling the truth, that is dishonest, that has its own agenda. Doesn't that message play right into him disclosing?
No, not exactly. The fact is that the government's always had a problem. The DOD's always had a problem, and then it's been part of it in maintaining the truth embargo over 70 years, which means that the DOD has been lying to us on this issue for 70 years. Of course, the DOD lied to us about Iraq. It lied to us about Vietnam. For national security reasons, lies are part of the game, and of course, that's a problem. It undermines their ability to take an action like disclosure now. But then the White House has also been involved in lies. Well, that's just the reality of it. And so how do you get out of that? It's not easy, right? It is not easy at all. But the step that was taken by the To the Stars Academy is a real game changer in terms of moving us to that place where they can act and get a relatively strong and immediate reception. Let me be clear. The United States government has thousands and thousands of UAP intercept gun camera footage, all right? They released 3 and created quite a stir, particularly the Tic Tac. What if they released 500 clips of 500 intercepts with these things flying all over the place at huge speeds? People have got to go, wait a minute. But of course, they haven't done that. They've taken a step forward. But let me be clear. Their intention was to act in 2016. The situation politically has delayed a major development, but it will not stop it. Because there is one fundamental driving issue that the government, both the White House and the DOD, cannot get away from. And that is this. It's as simple as possible. Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping of China can announce the ET presence tomorrow if they want to. And they will have plenty of evidence to back them up. And that will be the end. And the United States will have to follow second or third. This will be a geopolitical catastrophe for the United States. And so unless the DOD can convince me that they control Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and that these two gentlemen do what they want them to do, at any day, any time, one of those two nations will take the glory, the political legacy of being the disclosure country. And we can't stop it. And that is one of the reasons I believe that the Pentagon has decided to make this move, because there is ample evidence that Putin is considering this and could do it at any time. In fact, it fits completely into his agenda. So this is a global political issue with huge stakes, right? It transcends the evidentiary aspect of it. There's evidence everywhere. It's a political problem. But if you look at the world today, list all the major problems that we're facing that we can't resolve because of all this political dysfunction that exists not only in the United States but between other nations. And at the same time, we're running out of time. We're on the verge of another war. Eventually, we're going to stumble into a nuclear war. We've got massive environmental degradation. We no longer have the luxury of screwing around. We need to get going, and nothing would get us going faster than for the disclosure event to take place and galvanize the interest and the imagination and the energy of 7 billion people to engage a new world and start getting things done.
There is really just an open-ended question for anybody. It seems to me there's clearly an inside team in the Pentagon feeding TTSA on the outside.
Yes.
Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yes, it's true.
Okay. I guess that'll tie into my question. The reason why we went to the Iraq War first and foremost, and it's never given enough weight, is the fact that Junior was pissed off that his father was threatened by Saddam, put out a hit on his father. And when he came in office, he said, we're going in there and we're taking him out. That's number one. That was the main motivator to go in there. People talk about oil and stuff. We could have done that anytime. But everything got diverted, switched from Afghanistan into that. His objective was to do that. DOD didn't fake the evidence. If DOD did that, they might have been able to actually bring in actual material. That's why I always scratch my head when people say, oh, 9/11 was all was engineered. They flew the planes in, we all did that. And I'm like, okay, if we were able to do that and then detonate the buildings, which is part of the other conspiracy, how did we not go and plant evidence in Iraq? How did we not go all the way over there and say, oh, shit, well, excuse my language, there is nothing here. And so when it comes to DOD, that's its own, I look at that as kind of its own separate thing that's been around forever. It's been around longer than the Supreme, court officials. And so they're embedded. And so someone coming in and they're only there for like, their administration is only there for like 4 to 8 years, that's temporary. And so again, my question coming back to it is, what is the incentive for the government to do this? And then ultimately, if they come out and say what we all kind of know and believe, that there is an alien presence, where do we go from there? What is that going to be? Is that going to mean that we need to have them converse with us, go on, Oprah? What is ultimately that going to be? We're going to ask them, hey, can you help us with climate because we've kind of screwed things up? I mean, what is the ultimate end-all goal here to connect with them, and what's the possible outcome?
Well, I've talked about that at length. Once the disclosure event is out of the way, I assure you, for the 2 years that follows, it's going to be ETs 24/7. And after about 6 months of that, you're all going to be sick to death. You're not going to want to hear one more thing about ETs. And of course, we'll be getting hard information. It'll be the real thing. It's not going to. Most of the hoaxes and the frauds will disappear. And we're going to have an intense global engagement of this issue with a huge learning curve. After about 2 years of that, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that open contact with extraterrestrials, however they wish to have that open contact, will be, if anything, anticlimactic. In other words, the door will be open for ETs to directly engage governments, to be known as doing such, maybe even seen as doing such, and the people will be going, oh, that's really cool. What are they having to say? That can't happen before disclosure. Some people think it's already happened, but it's been made secretive. So it's disclosure, learning curve, open contact. And then if you want to get really spicy, I happen to think I know what that open contact is going to begin with.
Get spicy. Get spicy, Steve.
Yeah, is that one of the key reasons that the extraterrestrial engagement escalated in 1947 is that from 1945 to early 47, the ET saw us build a nuclear bomb, test a nuclear bomb, and drop nuclear bombs. And then in 1946, they saw what was clearly going to be a developing nuclear, I guess you could say, potential war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And they decided to engage. But that's not the only reason. The extraterrestrials are fully aware of the advances that we're making in terms of understanding the potential modalities for interstellar travel. Right? Whether you call it warp drive or whatever the hell you want to call it, we're closing in on it with our physics. I get emails on it all the time. And you can go online and Google it and discover some of these research programs. And I believe we will learn that one of the absolute aspects of extraterrestrial engagement of an emerging sentient technological species is this. You are not going to build an interstellar craft and put hydrogen bombs on it just to be safe and travel on out and hang out with us. That is not going to happen. And so as a result, as a society like ours starts to approach or maintains atomic weapons and then is moving towards interstellar craft, it's time for them to step in for an engagement. They could blow the planet up. They haven't done that. They could take it over, so we only do what they want. They haven't done that. What they're doing is advancing and helping to assist a disclosure process that leads to the formal announcement and then to open contact. And when that open contact takes place, one of the first things it's going to say is, hello, nice to finally talk to you. There's some interesting things that could happen. We look forward to working with you, but please understand, you got to get rid of the nukes. And you sure as hell are not taking them into space. If you try to do that, we'll blow up anything you build. which is perfectly represented by the fact that probably the most important evidence we have about ET engagement of this planet is the numerous instances of nuclear weapons tampering, where they have turned off nuclear weapons in situ, in our silos, not only in the United States, but Russia or the Soviet Union. What could be clearer than that, right? And so this is ultimately, when it all comes down, all the mishigash is over, this has ultimately come down to, we're an advanced technological species. We're still violent. We've built advanced weapons. We're close to interstellar drive, which means we're going to be dealing with them soon. And they have to engage us because bombs and interstellar craft ain't coming into space. They would be out of their frigging mind to allow that. Can you imagine? People flying around in interstellar space with hydrogen bombs in their rockets can turn up at any time. These species are not blowing each other up, and they're not going to let us do that to them.
I would like to ask Jan what his perspective is on the topics we're covering right now.
Thanks, Chant. Well, here's my perspective. I think, for all intents and purposes, disclosure happened, and it happened on December 16, 2017. You could back it up to October when TTSA made its announcement, but I think when it hit the front page of the New York Times, and there was a month of probably the most intense media coverage I've ever seen on the subject, all over the world and mostly the United States. I think what people are looking for now is they're looking for confirmation. And whether that comes in the way of the president stepping to a podium, which I don't think will ever happen, but it might, or it comes through NASA announcing they found life on Mars, or 100 other ways that it could come out. I think right now we're in a time period where people are just looking for confirmation that it's real. Because the first step in the Kubler-Ross grieving process is denial. And we still have a lot of people out there who say, okay, I heard what they said, but you know what? I'm still waiting for my own confirmation. I mean, the thing that always amazes me that people are skeptics until they see one of these crafts themselves. And then they become avid believers, or actually I call them knowers, because they've seen one, they know it's real. But I think we have to embrace what's going on with TTSA. Tom DeLonge is in a position he's in because he took a big gamble. If you read his book, Secret Machines, had the opportunity to talk to some very top-level people in our government and our military and our intelligence community. And he basically pitched them, hey, I know this is real, and I understand why we're not talking about it, and I think I could help you get the message out. And I think the reason why we see such push off on the word UFO is because as a community, the UFO community has been very much conspiracy minded. And I think our government is trying to figure our government. When I say our government, the problem with the government is when we think of government, we think of our elected officials. And I can't think of anyone who's more in the dark than them, honestly.
Right.
But I think what's going to happen is that this is going to be the first step on a journey of 1,000 miles, as the Chinese say. In other words, we've taken the first step. We've had a group of individuals who, in their previous careers, whether it was in the CIA or the Pentagon or in Congress or in private industry or in science, and I'm talking about, Al Puthoff, Stephen Justice, Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo. I mean, these guys have taken it upon themselves to step out and put themselves out publicly on this subject, and they're working on our behalf very diligently to get our Congress and people focused on this thing. Now, I'm not discounting anything that Stephen said, because I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but I think a lot of it, from what I'm figuring out, is being done. It's all been privatized, and as you know, anything that's been privatized can't be FOIA'd. So all these people chasing FOIAs, trying to figure out what's going on, good luck, because honestly, there's nothing in the actual government documents that's going to tell you this. And if you read Ruppelt's book, who came up a while ago, I think Frank brought him up, he even talks about the destruction of anything that would point to this being real. And we know from Schiff down in New Mexico, before he was killed from cancer, that he was trying to get the records for Roswell, and magically all those records have been destroyed. I even had a conversation with Chris Mellon. Why is it that we don't have the video footage and the camera footage from Gordon Cooper's encounter with a flying saucer at Edwards Air Force Base. It wasn't called that; it was called Muroc Air Force Base back in the early '60s. And his answer was, Jan, well, actually, Gordon Cooper was in my office, and we requested those records, and we were told they were destroyed because the government needed storage space. I can't think of anything more ludicrous than that. But having read some of these other stories about stuff being destroyed, I even had a military person call me up who was a special forces guy recently to tell me that he could verify, having been in a couple of secret operations, that after the secret operations are done, they destroy all the records to it, so no one could ever prove that it ever happened. So, I mean, I feel like we're kind of in this spy versus spy novel right now, if you remember back to Mann magazine. And I'm watching this thing daily unfold, and all I can say is let's take the first step. And the first step is UFOs are real. And we've not only had that confirmed by Stanton, we've had it now confirmed by people who worked in our own government and have stepped out of government to help push this forward. So let's get behind them and let's make it happen. Because there's probably about another 100. Go ahead.
All right, Jan, really quick, can you confirm that you will be maintaining the Mutual UFO Network name and not calling it the Mutual UAP Network going forward?
Well, you know, I think Rich made a good point there. I'm thinking about changing the name to MUAPN. Yeah,
it's all about.
No, we're gonna call it MUFON. But I'm just saying, look, there's probably a lot of talks going on that we're not privy to. This whole thing, in my opinion, went dark back in the late 50s, early 60s for one reason and one reason only, and that's because of space-time manipulation. And if you talk to Hal Puthoff, they figured out the equations, as Ben Rich shared with me many, many years ago. They figured out the equations. They know how to manipulate space-time. Now, whether we actually built it or not, I'm not sure that's still an open question. I believe we have, but there's others who are telling me we haven't. So, but someone somewhere seems to have built these things because we're watching them in our skies. We're getting them reported to us, right? And we can kind of tell, Michael Schratt brought it, we can tell which ones are ours and which ones are theirs because theirs are totally integrated and completely seamless. And ours look like something like the F-117. They're very angular. They've got antennas sticking out and all sorts of strange things. So, you know, I guess I'm just encouraged because we're moving forward and we're having a different conversation than we had 5 years ago. And it's with people who seem to know what they're talking about. So I'm willing to, as I think everyone else should be, ride the wave and let's push this thing to the next question. Right now, it's UFOs are real. We've got that fact that figured out. Let's get to the next question and the next question and the next question because there's a lot more that needs to come out. It's not going to come out in the next 2 months, 2 years. It's going to take probably years for all this stuff to play out. I think the conversation is going to shift as we go through it. So that's my thoughts on it.
I wanted to say something, and that is I really think Stanton Friedman would have hoped that we would have had a lively discussion like this in his tribute to him, and just wanted to make that comment. So I'm really glad we were able to talk about such a wide variety of topics here, and actually wanted to ask Irena if she has any comments about what we're talking about.
When I worked for the DIA, I was in satellite photography of aircrafts, and my supervisors turned in a UFO report, and it was strongly debunked, even though it was illogical, by the government, even though we were the authorities. And I imagine now, with all the new advances, that they have really good satellite photography of UFOs. But I think one thing is saying for sure they're ET or what they are, nobody knows. And there seems to be some kind of a strong resistance in the government, which I don't understand. So that was just my comment. I think there's a lot of data that the government has, but I don't know, whether they can fully explain everything, even if they do have the data.
Wonderful. And Earl, do you mind just making any comments that might come to mind about what we're talking about here?
Well, just really, what I keep on returning to is Stanton, of course, who were, this is a tribute to, and how much he would love this panel and all the different viewpoints and I think that it was a wonderful, wonderful tribute to him, because he's the one that pushed us towards critical thinking as ufologists and researchers. And however this rolls out, and I hope that I do know that people are much, much more open to disclosure now than they once were. They don't always play the X-Files theme music anymore when this comes on the news. So much has happened over the last couple of years. And everybody here, has played a great part in it. I feel so honored to have been part of this panel today, with people like Steve Bassett and Rich Hoffman and Irena and you guys all have you carry a lot of weight in the science in the field, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out, and what a joy and a pleasure to be part of this and to be alive right now. Sadly, Stanton's no longer with us, but his spirit certainly is. His spirit of adventure and his spirit of scientific research using the scientific method. So that's kind of my final thoughts today on this whole thing. Wonderful panel.
Yeah, thanks, Earl.
Thank you for saying that. And I would also like to read the obituary of Stanton Friedman, if our guest could please stay on while I do that. And then I would like to go ahead and let everybody know, all of our listeners know, who is on the show today. Life Legacy. Stanton Terry Friedman took his last breaths in this world, in a place where he spent so much time over the past 5 decades, an airport. He died in Toronto on May 13th on the way home to Fredericton from a speaking engagement in Ohio. He officially retired in 2018, but his passion for speaking about UFOs kept him accumulating air miles, even at the age of 84. Over the years, he lectured in 10 provinces, 50 states, and 19 countries. Stan was born on July 29, 1934. He grew up in Linden, New Jersey, but after meeting his wife, Marilyn, he became so smitten, he eventually followed her across the border to New Brunswick, Canada, where they put down roots in Fredericton, a city he happily called home for nearly 40 years. Along with Marilyn, Stan leaves behind his daughters Rachel and Melissa, a grandson James Kenneth, and a great-grandson James. He was predeceased by 2 sons, Sean and James Leo. Decades before his attention was captured by Little Green Men, Stan worked as a waiter in the Catskills to put himself through university. It was there in the Borscht Belt that he first laid eyes on a lobster and danced with debutantes. Afterwards, he worked as a nuclear physicist for General Electric, McDonnell Douglas, and other companies. But by the 70s, he'd abandoned those top-secret projects to focus on his research into UFOs. In that career, he gave hundreds, more likely thousands, of interviews and appeared on TV shows such as Larry King Live and Unsolved Mysteries. He is heralded as the man who brought the Roswell incident into the public eye. While his mind often dwelled on solar systems light years away, here on Earth, he was a kind-hearted softy who never failed to open a door or pull out a chair for the people he was with. Stan was a man who was out of this world, but he'll be greatly missed by those of us still on the planet. I would like to go ahead and let everybody know the wonderful guests we had on our show today. We had the great Chase Kloetzke of MUFON, and we also had Michael W. Hall, paranormal lawyer. We had Jim Mann, director of Phoenix MUFON, Stacey Wright, assistant director of Phoenix MUFON. We also had Alejandro Rojas and Karen Brard. And we also had on the panel today, it looks like we have Dr. Irena Scott, Harzan, International Director of MUFON. I wanted to mention Dr. Irena Scott is author of multiple books related to UFO literature and also Ohio history. And we have Rich Hoffman of the Scientific Coalition of UAPs, or UAP, I'll have to have him correct me on that. And then Dean Alioto, a movie director. We also had Steve Bassett on, and he's an activist in the realm of ufology. And Earl Gray, the chief investigator for the Southern California chapter of MUFON, and wanted to thank everybody for having been on the show today. And it's been a real pleasure and a privilege to have been able to have the honor of making this tribute to Stanton Friedman today on the show with you all.
It was fantastic. I had a great time.
Thank you. The irony is that Stanton probably is having all of his questions answered right now. He knows more about aliens and UFOs than we do at this moment. He's probably on the other side, just waiting for us to catch up with him.
Fantastic.
We need to get a medium right now and get in contact with him. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Chant and Frank. You guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time today. We appreciate it very much. We look forward to being able to have the opportunity to speak with you all later on in the year in different interviews. Thank you. We should do this again. Let's all have a panel again soon, shall we?
Sure.
We'll,
Fantastic.
We'll review the TTSA shows when they hit.
Oh, yeah.
Great idea.
That'll be a lot of fun. So, all right. So
Blessings
I think,
to you guys.
Thanks a lot. So appreciate everybody coming on. It was fabulous, fantastic, and we will wrap up. We're going to be back tomorrow night with Calvin Parker to talk all about the Pascagoula case. Anything else, Chant, before we wrap up?
I think that's it. I really feel like our show has covered everything we possibly could under the sun, including having had the opportunity to pay tribute to a true legend. And I know I said this before, but I do believe in my heart that Stanton Friedman would have wanted us to have this kind of lively discussion today to cover as much as we can about the topic that we all love to talk about. I know I love to research it day and night. I actually do. And I can't get enough of it. This is what I do, is I actually read as much as I can and I learn as much as I can from greats like Stanton Friedman and from the folks that we have on our panel today.
Yep, you bet. It was a fantastic show. I had a few comments, but to be honest about it, I can't top what was already said. So I appreciate it, everybody, and good night, and we will see you back here again tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.